listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the Independent Corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. It is July 21st, 7 a.m. Eastern. I hope everybody's having a wonderful morning. Let's get into COVID news here. There were about 62,012 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. Also, about 300 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 37,975 cases per day. That's an increase of 195% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 56% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,159,723 people across the United States and killed 608,717 of us. A hospital in Texas has reported its first case of the Lambda variant as the state tries to curtail the progress of the Delta strain. Lambda was first detected in Peru. WHO officials stated that this strain is, quote, a variant of interest, end quote, and that their primary focus was still on Delta as it has a much higher viral load, which we might want to come back to. You know, a pretty simple idea, but we might want to come back on that for a second. In national news, drug-related deaths in the United States of America have risen 29% in 2020 from 2019. Largely attributed to the pandemic, drug use in America has gone up dramatically, setting the drug-related death count to over 93,000 in 2020. A California couple is being charged with involuntary manslaughter after their gender reveal party started a massive fire in California last year. 13 people were injured, 5 homes and 15 buildings were destroyed, and firefighter Charles Morton lost his life. The couple also faces 29 counts, spanning over 3 different charges relating to the illegal use of fire. Gender reveal parties have been responsible for a fatal plane crash, partygoers' deaths, multiple wild and brush fires, and involuntary pipe bombs, and, the fear of many a woke person around the world, I guess, or something like that. Isn't it like a sin against modernity to have a gender reveal party? I thought that we were supposed to determine these things for ourselves at a later age, right?
I have no idea.
You have no idea?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I guess we're both a little bit, I don't know. We'll come back on this one too. In international news, the Austrian government is reporting on local cases of Havana syndrome in and among the diplomats in the U.S. Embassy. Named for the capital of Cuba, where American and Canadian diplomats first reported symptoms of the mysterious illness back in 2016. Havana syndrome involves hearing strange noises, headaches, hearing loss, memory loss, and nausea. The illnesses were blamed at the time on suspected microwave attacks by the Cubans. You might remember Trump commenting on this, kind of pitching in at the time. This, however, would fail to explain why diplomats are now suffering from these symptoms in Austria, not Cuba. 3 research institutions in Italy released a report several weeks ago in which they pushed back on the narrative that China is guilty of genocide in its treatment of Uyghurs. Those institutions are the Italian Institute of Politics, Society, and Economics, the Italian Institute of International Diplomacy, and the Italian Eurasian Mediterranean Research Center. In tech news, Biden is set to nominate Jonathan Cantor to lead the Justice Department's antitrust division. Cantor is an antitrust lawyer and is expected to improve upon Biden's surprisingly trust-busting oriented selections in key positions so far. Last month, Biden named Nina Khan to lead the Federal Trade Commission, and earlier this year, Biden named Tim Wu to the National Economic Council, each of whom has spoken out against the continued consolidation of power in the tech industry. And Cantor, of course, will be joining those ranks, joining that side of things. The phones of French President Emmanuel Macron and over a dozen of his government chief government officials, may have been targeted by the Moroccan government. The phone numbers for the 16 officials were found among the 50,000 long, phone number long list that was released as a part of this report this weekend. And again, this has to do with Pegasus, the malware service created by the company NSO Group, which, again, in that same report,
RSO.
NSO.
I thought it was RSO.
It is NSO.
Okay.
I'm like 99% sure.
I'm sorry. You're right.
Yes.
I'm literally sitting here looking at the article NSO.
You're good. You're good. No, you're good. Anyway, Pegasus, it's a malware service used by this company, NSO Group, which sells this service basically to a lot of people around the world, including governments, the Moroccan government, Azerbaijani government, the government of the United Arab Emirates, even Mohammed bin Salman, questionably maybe the Saudi Arabian state itself, but at least Mohammed bin Salman was known back in, I believe, it was 2017, maybe 2018, with the Jeff Bezos pics.
Yes.
I don't know which word.
Penis pics. Yeah.
Penis pics. There we go. Thank you. Those are, I have a dirty enough mind that was not
like,
the first.
What word can I use?
Exactly. That was like the fourth word to come to my mind. You know what I mean. Anyway. So anyway, that was Mohammed bin Salman using Pegasus against Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
That at the time, people might remember that. In fact, a lot of folks probably do, for better and for worse.
Well, I guess the wildness of the story is apparently all world leaders, or multiple world leaders, were under usage for, meaning their names was on the list. Macron, all these guys.
Macron specifically. Well, but here's the thing though, they were targeted.
Yes.
That is, and what does that mean? It means, at least we believe they were targeted. This list is a little bit confusing, but this list is a sort of first indication, okay, who is in the network of interest, in the records that have been released about this stuff.
Right.
In other words, whether they were targeted or whether they were closely, connected to somebody who was targeted. It's unclear. For instance, whether the attacks actually worked. I'm guessing that if we knew that the attacks worked, we would be finding out.
It's like a target is different than whether or not it succeeded.
Yeah, but to be clear, the sort of level of technical appraisal that they're bringing to it right now, they're just looking through this list and sort of like going, okay, that phone number's on this list, this phone number's on that part, et cetera. Like, these are, if you know Macron's phone number and you see it on the list, that's a big story.
Yes.
But what that does not mean is that A, it was successfully breached, or even B, that it was potentially targeted in the sense that there was like a malware sent to it. It's just appearing on this list, and it's still kind of unclear to me exactly what this list means.
Yeah, Macron would have to give up his phone in order for it to be tested.
Yeah,
and like that type of stuff.
Anyway, one last quick headline here in Earth and Science news. Chinese state media say the flooded city of Zhengzhou received more rain yesterday than it normally does in a year. It is not a good situation. I kind of want to come back to this in a little while. 16 are dead there. Anyway, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are back. The first thing I wanted to get to is just the viral load. It's pretty simple, and I don't want to be too pedantic here, but the viral load, didn't know what it meant before 13 months ago or 15 months ago, whenever I started to research this stuff, late February, March, that kind of thing. Pretty darn simple, though. And it's for like understanding how infectious and what the infection looks like, it's pretty useful for understanding.
Yes.
Here is the basic theory. Say I get moderately sick. Like I catch the virus, it starts to populate, and I experience moderately bad symptoms, and say I'm moderately infectious. Yeah. Broadly, what that's going to mean is I'm producing a moderate level of, the new coronavirus viruses, basically.
Let's say default.
Something like that.
So like a default amount of viral that you're putting out and creating and generating. Yeah.
And broadly, the more of those that you're creating, the more likely you are to spread that pathogen to another host. Yeah, the more likely you are to infect somebody else. And so you can sort of think of it very simply. The specific variant aside, the more of this germ, of this virus that you have in your body, the more of it that you're shedding, the more likely it is that somebody else is going to catch it.
Right.
And, then different strains will produce more or less of the viral load of itself.
Basically, the higher the viral load, the more infectious you are.
Broadly speaking, everything else being equal. Yeah. That's the point. And so what does it mean effectively? It broadly has to do with how many of these copies of the virus is your body creating. That's effectively the size of the virus load, right. And that gets you into the ballpark at least.
Your body, basically, you're infected, the virus hijacks your cell and says, okay, we're going to make you produce copies of me. Just make all copies of me.
Yes, yeah.
And, that stuff bursts, goes into, infects the other cells and everything else and so forth. Eventually your body says, hey, that doesn't look like us. And it gets this kind of effect where your body is trying to find ways to kill the virus. But I think your point is the amount of that stuff that you put out is going to determine how infectious you are or how infectious the variant is.
Yes.
And in this case, they have the Lambda variant.
The Delta variant, which is way more infectious, at least that's the belief. In fact, I saw like R6, which again, if COVID is usually like 2 point something, for every person that gets it, 2 point something more people will get it. With the Delta variant, they suspected it could be as bad as for every person that gets it, 6 more people get it, which is a crazy.
That is insane.
And it has to do with the viral load. It has to do with the level of virus that it creates. It creates more of it.
Yeah, that's insane. Because that creates all sorts of problems in regards to how do you deal with the virus that seems to be getting more infectious. Now, the catch is, well, it may be more infectious, but it may be less, let's say, lethal. But we don't even know if that's the case because of the number of copies that these things seem to be populating. And it's a problem, right? You get so many people infected. Let's say just in the United States, 30 million people. how many potential or opportunities are there for variations within the 30 million people? And then you just take it from the U.S. and take it around the world. And then your planet is basically stuck with just trying to reconcile something over the course of time and just having to let it basically peter out.
Yeah.
With doing everything we can in the meantime in order to lessen the impact of it. But we make it worse. We make it worse. Like by having these arguments about, hey, well, I don't want to wear masks. Did you hear Jerome Adams? Jerome Adams, I think it was maybe last week. He comes out and says, I was wrong for telling people not to wear masks in the beginning.
Really?
Yeah. I was shocked by that. I was like, whoa. He's coming out and saying that.
He was one of the part of the chorus back
Yes, he
then.
was.
He was along with
The
Redfield
CDC,
and Fauci.
the World Health Organization, these guys basically saying, and Fauci,
Right,
basically
Redfield
saying
and
the
Fauci.
mask. Yeah, all of these guys.
Exactly. Fauci was the White House Coronavirus Task Force leader, Robert Redfield, head of the CDC, and Jerome Adams, the Surgeon General of the United States. Those are like three key officials that you'd expect to speak in unison about any issue of critical importance having to do with our medical health.
Well,
anyway,
his point is, he says, I was wrong back then, and I think we're making a mistake now. That was his point.
Well, in what way?
But this push to reopen, this push to get the economy back up, to say, okay, we're back, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And his point is, look, the numbers are spiking. You can't ignore that. And, in the same way that, back then they were like, okay, well, we don't have enough masks, so we're trying to get people to not, that type of stuff. He's like, it's a mistake.
I'm sorry. I don't think that way of handling that for him it's too little too late. And for people who are like, okay, so you're going to fess up, you're going to post your L here. You're going to tell us that you lost this one, that you were wrong about this. And then you're going to immediately give us another recommendation based on political immediacy.
Now, his recommendation is only that they're letting politics dictate the health stuff, just like they were doing back then.
Yeah, well, same as it ever was.
Well, yeah, but I mean, does he have a point? Like, we've always talked about this inelegant maneuver that was going to have to take place between, all right, Fauci is in charge to Biden is in charge, meaning there was going to be this changeover. The moment that you don't have 5,000 people dying a day, then at some point people are going to go, all right, we got to get the economy back up and running. We got to get this back up and running. We got to deal with inflation. We got to deal with these problems that people, okay, how do we do that? And how do we make that transition from one to the other? That was always going to be weird and always going to be inelegant. And, I think his point is, yeah, we're trending too far on the other side where this seems to be getting out of our control. That's his point. Now, the catch is he right? And I don't know if we know he's right. I mean, I don't know if we know that yet. I mean, this is going to be one of those things where we keep pumping, puttering along, and then it's like, okay, 3,000 people are dead a day. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe he was right. This went too far. By the same token, what is the alternative? And that's the part that gets a little hazier. Shut everything down again? That doesn't seem to fly. I mean, I think people would burn stuff down if you tried to do that at this point. You are trying to up the number of vaccines, so they're trying to do that. But you have elements on the other political part who are like, that's a horrible idea, or we want freedom. And whether that's a reflection of the populace or not, it's still there. And you still have that group. And so from Biden's standpoint, what does he do? And in his head, he freaks out and starts attacking social media companies, missing the point that, dude, that's not your issue. Like, because if you're going to do that, you need to go after Fox News if you're going to do that. But that's a much larger platform.
But I thought for a little while you were arguing that was the issue, that you had these influencers, including Fox News, who were coming out.
Because I think those influencers give this kind of cover to people's, I think it bolsters their political point of view, meaning it gives them a security, a safe space where they wouldn't necessarily have. But I'm looking at the research on this, and it does seem like people have a higher propensity to either change their mind or a higher propensity to say, okay, fair enough, I'll do it, when it's somebody else that's pushing them. The social media thing, it just gives them cover. I think it makes them, confident in their point of view as opposed to being a little bit more.
That's the thing.
Yeah,
I agree completely. That's kind of what I've been saying. For the last couple of days, it's like the specifically Fox News, but you can argue that a lot of social media in general, if you're not being personally swayed by your friends or your family or whatever, there are some people certainly who've read into the research and they've been biased. They've been biased or they've been swayed or whatever, and maybe they're right. I don't want to completely just foreclose that as a possibility, but I don't believe it right now. But regardless. Whatever the case, Fox News or MSNBC, they're largely there to confirm your beliefs.
Yes.
And occasionally to add new ones into the mix. But what keeps you coming back is when they tell you that you're right about the way the world is.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because that makes you comfortable in a disorienting reality that's constantly changing and feels threatening.
Yeah.
Like it does right now.
Yeah.
And we've lived under fear and lock for over a year at this point.
600,000 people dropping dead.
Yeah, and so I agree. The way to do that is if you're going to try to change people's minds, try to get the people close to the people to change their minds. And ideally, then you don't really have to do it. But on the other hand, how do you do that
I personally, honestly,
I'm holding up, but
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, you're good. It was a rhetorical question. These things are often unclear. Sorry. I'm kind of latching on to Kim Iverson's argument like a life draft. Some stuff I agree with her on, obviously. Some stuff I disagree with her on. But the argument, Biden should have done a better job of explaining this. He should still do a better job of explaining this. The interaction between vaccines and variants, just that is confusing enough for a lot of people. Like, wait, why am I supposed to get this? I think younger people, by and large, kind of get, even though it's still kind of confusing. Okay, they have the vaccine. I guess if I get the vaccine, I'm a little bit less likely to spread it. But my grandma or my aunts, they already have the vaccine. I'm not that likely to, they're not that likely to catch it. Why do I really need to get it? I can kind of explain that one. But the vaccine and variant situation, if I don't have a clear sense of where the administration is trying to go with this, how they're planning on doing it, how they're planning on administering these things, making it make sense for us, what the plan is, I don't know if they don't have that or if they're just not saying it.
I don't know. I mean, they put out all sorts of media on the vaccine, on variants, on COVID, on the number of people who are dying. They have the death notes that are up constantly. I mean, they used to have the death totals. We read the death totals every day ourselves in regards to focusing people's mind on that stuff.
That's fear. That's not education.
Well, that is education when you know how many people are dying. It gives a heads up of like, here's the severity of X. And hint, hint. It's that, right? I mean, even if it's still data, still information. From the standpoint of the vaccines, yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because that stuff is complicated. I mean, we've had doctors one after the next, and they would have to spend like 15, 20, 30 minutes going into what mRNA is, how that stuff works. And I don't necessarily know if people are entirely in tune to listening to those type of dissertations or those type of explanations. But I 1,000% agree with you that the president of the United States going before the nation and saying, look, this is the reality of what's taking place. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And this is what we're trying to do. Yeah, I think that does have gravity. It does have effect. But I don't buy this notion that, oh, these guys haven't been trying to explain it. No, I think they have been trying. You can say they failed at it, and you can say they haven't necessarily been entirely successful at it. But I do think they've tried to get across a reality of things. But I got to be honest, I don't even know if they know. I mean, because I think their angle is 70% vaccinated and we're good. I think that's their mindset.
That's a failure.
That didn't work.
We've been talking about that for months.
Yeah, that didn't work.
If we were ahead of that ball, they have.
Canada has passed us.
Yeah.
Canada's passed us. We were at 48 and 49%. We just stopped.
In terms of the vaccination. Yeah. It's true. If you look at the chart, the Europe as a whole, the composite map of all the different European countries, clearly we're talking about this for months. They were behind us for a long time. But if you look at how we're starting to stagnate and they're still going, they're going to be beating us.
It's an aggravating thing to read 48 every day.
Now here's, if I want to cinch some feathers, if Trump won, would we be fully vaccinated at this point? Would he have been able to convince his intransigent base that actually, hey, it kind of does make sense. We've got a serious thing. If we want to get these lockdowns done for good, the best way we can do that is by getting as fully vaccinated as possible.
Yes. I think so. I think
he would have had a lot better chance than Biden.
I think he has a lot better chance of influence.
Yes.
Than Biden on this.
Yeah.
Now, the catch is, and somebody asked Jen Psaki this, and I thought it was a really interesting question because it gets to, okay, what is your objective? Is your objective a political thing or is your objective America? It's one of those questions. Like, is it purely politics or is it America? And they say, hey, will you bring in Trump to help you sell your vaccinations? Now, my thought was, that's a great idea. Like, that's a great idea. Even if you have to say, President Trump here helped get this off the ground. I don't care if it's true. Do you care about America or not, Joe Biden? And from Joe Biden's standpoint, Joe Biden needs those vaccinations to be up as high as possible.
Can
for
you
his
imagine
own
that, though?
He should do it. Why shouldn't he do it?
Because of January 6th.
I don't care.
It's just the internal messaging.
I don't care. But think about it. Because
that's like vaudevillian theater at this point. It's like, let's bring the villain back on for applause. Didn't he do such a good job?
But it gets across this idea of, if you brought in Trump to try to sell this, do you think he would get more bang for his buck? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, you said it just now yourself.
Of course. I just don't think that.
Absolutely.
I just think that Biden would be silly to try to. But I hear you.
But what would the effect be? Play it out. What would the effect be? Joe Biden calls Trump, hey, Trump, I get you're a villain. I get you sucking everything else. However, do you care about America?
Well, because the problem is Trump would successfully capitalize on that to increase Republican chances in the midterms and his chances in 3.5 years, whatever. You know what I mean?
It's the hallmark of bipartisanship from the standpoint of Biden. Now, don't get me wrong. His party would hate him for it. They would be screaming at him and everything else.
He's not
And Biden would have to come out and say, look, I get you're saying we need to have this January 6th commission, but America matters more. And we need to get vaccinations up in America as high as possible. So, yes, I am bringing in Donald Trump coming on stage. applause, gold, something.
I said it, but it reminds me of like Tarif and like Trump needs to pardon Julian
Right.
Assange. And it was like, it just seems like it's getting less likely, man. I'm sorry. I don't think this is going to happen.
I'm just saying, you brought that one up.
I did.
And the more I think about it, I'm like, that's not a bad idea. I mean, like I said, Psaki was asked. And, you know, it's like you think about it, you're like, what would happen? What would happen? It's like challenge the assumption, right? Well, would more Trumpers get on board? Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And you made the point yourself. You're just like, look, I haven't heard Trump do or say anything negative about the
vaccines ever. It's his thing. That's the
No, but I think the thing is Donald Trump has put so much bad blood in regards to the medical field and all this other stuff when he took office that it's a hangover. But I love the idea. Love the idea. Because at that point, it's what matters more. America, in regards to getting these people vaccinated and everything else, or your hatred of Trump. And does Trump get anything out of that? Maybe. Does Biden get something out of it? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Biden can't get those vaccination rates over 70%, Biden is going to have difficulty justifying how he's the, smart person in the room and all this other stuff. Meaning they both get something out of it. I get it. But there's certain things that Biden need in this case. And one of those things is the vaccination rates higher. And I think that's a far better way of going about it as opposed to screaming at people, Facebook is killing people.
I will give it to you, Jamarl. If that were to happen, that would be a sign that we were living in a much healthier society than we are.
Really?
Yes.
You just said it was vaudevillian theater.
I agree. But I think
I'm bringing you over to my side on this. You're like, maybe he's right.
No, I think that would be a step forward from where we are right now. It's true. Because if Trump, think about this for a second. If Trump goes on stage, what message? Depends on how he does it.
The message is very specific to COVID.
But that can be a kind of transfer of power, even if it isn't at all explicit. If it's just tacit. If Trump's from Trump to Biden for the time being, he's like, okay, whatever, the election was stolen. I'll come back in. I'll fix things up. I'll come back. And then his base sees him working with Biden. That's the key point. Working with the current president.
Does it look like a betrayal?
I don't know if it would look like a betrayal because I think they don't have any other choices. And therefore, who are they going to turn to? It's like,
this is our guy.
It's like progressives. It's like progressives with Democrats. Who do you got, really? I'm sorry to say it. But anyway, I think the same thing applies to Trump. We want to close this one out?
Yeah, let's close this out. I just think this is very interesting. I mean, this could have been a monologue. I mean, the more I think about it, I am getting more into this camp of, I think it's good, because it's priority. The issue is priority. What is your highest priority in this moment? Is your highest priority to save lives, or is your highest priority just the political machinations and everything else?
Yeah.
And is there a reality to the politics? Well, people are dying. 600,000 people died. And we're talking about 200% increase in numbers. So is there a reality to this, or is everything just politics? No, I think there's a reality to it. And in this case, I think it would be awesome if Donald Trump came, got on stage with Biden. They're like, they hate each other, but they're shaking hands for this moment. And they're like, we're together in this moment for COVID. Get vaccinated, please. And then they just walk off stage. Everybody hates each other. Everybody knows it. But because everybody hates each other, it makes it that much more impactful. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, these people, these enemies, Superman and Lex Luthor are here together to tell people to get COVID infection. That stuff. Yeah. No, I think it has gravity and influence. You brought it up.
It's true. It is 100% true. And I kind of came around to it.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys are living in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We were having this conversation about COVID, and this has been something that I've been bothered by and concerned by. 600,000 human beings, just like you and me, drop dead. They're no longer on the face of this planet. You have 30 million more that have been infected with a particular virus that have consequences that are unforeseen at this point going forward. And the number of people who are vaccinated, 99% or 95% are the ones who are basically getting sick at this point, and they're the ones who are basically dying, with a few people who are vaccinated getting breakthrough. Most people on the page, especially from the standpoint of media, of this is an issue, get vaccinated, increase your level of vaccinations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as a way of trying to stem it. Because at this point, I got to be honest, I'm not sure what else there is. Staying in the house in perpetuity doesn't seem a viable option. I hate wearing masks. Hate it. 1,000% hate it. Despite the fact that I would force myself to do it if I'm going into various places, because I have no idea whether the vaccine that I got is whether it's going to be protective, because I don't necessarily know whether it's going to work within my physiology in a way that it works in a person with typical or normal physiology. Meaning that despite people getting the vaccine, it doesn't entirely mean that those people are entirely safe. And that has nothing to do with the efficacy of the vaccine. That has everything to do with the way that their body deals with it. You have all sorts of people who are immunocompromised. Some people who don't even know they're immunocompromised are walking around in that way. And the people who are unvaccinated, who they're saying they're making that choice or whatever else, those people become petri dishes for additional variants that are basically spewing out of nowhere. Lambda, Delta, Alpha, whatever. And we, in our population, is basically stuck with, 50% or more that are not on board either for the science, is not on board because they distrust the institution itself, is not on board because they don't necessarily believe that it's safe. You have all of these things that are going in line with it. But basically, at an exponential level, what it means is that we are stuck with COVID for the foreseeable future. This is unfortunate. Right now, Fox News, Brian Kilmeade gets into a fight with Ducey, who is talking about masks and talking about all of this stuff that we are basically stuck with going forward. Let's play this clip, because Kilmeade has been pretty strong on this camp of killing his audience. Let's play the clip.
But listen, if you didn't get a vaccination, that's your choice. And if you did, like I did, and they did, and maybe you did, then you should not wear a mask. And if you didn't, if you want to go cliff diving this weekend, you don't have to check with me. It seems a little dangerous, but I'm not going to judge you. And if you go ahead and put yourself in danger, if you feel as though this is not something for you, don't do it. But don't affect my life.
99% of the people who are dying from COVID are unvaccinated.
That's
so
their choice.
They don't want to die. So they are, the administration and the government is saying, we need the mask mandate to protect the unvaccinated.
That's not their job. It's not their job to protect anybody.
Well, it is literally their job to protect people. It is literally the government's job to ensure for the safety of this country. What do you think national security means if it's not security for the nation? Meaning it's built into the process that the job of the people who are in the administration to ensure for the life and livelihoods of the other individuals in the nation, whether those people get vaccinated or not. And fact of the matter is, this is coming out of a context. 600,000 Americans have dropped dead. And your response is, this is not their job to protect the nation. You've had more people die than were in wars over the course of the nation's history. And you are still on this network screaming that it is not their job. What? Individual liberty? What about my individual liberty? To not live in a country that is ensconced with people who are infected with the virus or petri dishes for that virus. Each and every person that is unvaccinated is basically creating a risk for the people that are vaccinated, because there could be a variant that basically breaks through my vaccination or my mom's vaccination. Every day, going back to the last year, with people like Kilmeade here, who are screaming about mask mandates and everything else, about how much they hated him and everything else, the number of people that are infected and the number of people that died were directly related on some level to the fight and the argument against mask, vaccinations. And you can even make an argument that the reason that Trump lost this race in and of itself was because he didn't take it seriously when he needed to take it seriously. Can't believe you're still here screaming, it is not their job, in the context of a nation that has lost this many human beings, but this many businesses that went belly up, for this many people that are ill and are stuck with medical bills going forward. And you are still here screaming that is not the government's job to ensure for the safety of the nation. What are the point in traffic laws? What are the point in laws in general that see to the safety of the nation if it's not for the safety and the well-being and the welfare of the public. The argument doesn't fly. If indeed you have a huge number of people that are unvaccinated, at some point you're going to create a situation that is going to be a problem for the rest of us, whether people got vaccinated or not. Am I my brother's keeper? I am, whether he accepts it or not. Shane, what are your thoughts here? I mean, in his head, in his mind, it is not the government's job to provide for the welfare of the nation. And I think that is ludicrous, especially with 600,000 human beings dead and with 200% increases in the number of cases. What are your thoughts?
For one thing, being your brother's keeper, whether or not he wants it, reminds me of a jailer. Generally a bad move. I would try to avoid that in all seriousness.
Is that the one you're going to go after?
That's the one I'm going to go after. And we're going to close, folks. That was enough.
Right.
No, I mean, we are a tiny bit over time, but I'll just give a bit more response than we can actually close. The thing is, you're pushing back against him. This is one of those, I forget, there's a good statement for this. I forget what they're called, like scissor statements or something like this, where two people can hear somebody say something. One person gets pissed. The other is like, okay, that kind of, I can kind of see what they're saying. And then like they fail to connect over it.
I get what he's saying. Individual responsibility.
Individual responsibility, not just that, but also, yes, the government, the American government specifically, what are the bounds of safety? You know, do we all live in padded cages? Of course not. And there's a gradient of how much the government is supposed to involve itself in these things. And there are plenty of Americans who believe, according to the original texts, according to the Constitution and the intentions of the Founding Fathers, what would best approach, their vision of America would be like a night watchman state where there's radically no protection. I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm just saying it's a conversation.
That's his framing of the world, right?
But whatever.
That's what he wants.
I think the real thing you're pushing back against here is the perception that he's saying things that will get people to not get vaccinated. But what's the alternative here? Do we want there to be a mandate? Because I personally don't.
I'm pushing back on this notion that
okay to make
it's
fun
not
of
the government's job. I think it is the government's job to ensure that people are safe.
Do what?
Ensure safety? You mean ensure for the well-being of the public?
Yeah, because ensuring safety, that's a super abstract verb phrase.
It is abstract, yes.
Yeah. So what does it mean? Like,
I do think it means, like, at the very basic, that if there is a virus that is killing a large number of people, and you say, hey, basic due diligence is to wear a mask, or basic due diligence is social distancing, yeah, I do think those things are perfectly within the purview of the government. I mean, why do we even have handicap stickers or handicap locations and all this stuff?
So here are three different things three different levels of. One is, okay, let's make fun of these people. Two, let's make it
I'm not making fun of him. I'm just saying he's wrong.
Please hear me out for a second.
Go for it.
One is, let's make fun of people who choose not to get vaccinated because they blah, blah, blah. So it's social pressure. Two is, let's allow businesses to exclude people who have failed to get vaccinated. That's a sort of light mandate. Three is, you require people under penalty of fine or law or jail or whatever that they get vaccinated.
And I'm not for that.
I'm not for that third one either. I'm pretty sure I'm not for that second one, but I can get it more. And the first one seems perfectly acceptable to me. Between the first and the second, you're probably going to make a lot of progress. And then if you add in a few positive role models like Trump and some clear messaging and language from Biden, you could probably cross the hurdle, I think. At least increase the vaccination rate.
You increase the number of people who are going to get vaccinated, the probability of people, right?
Yeah, because when I hear Brian Kilmeade defending this stuff, I kind of get where he's going, because I don't want there to be a mandate. If the explicit statement that he's making is people
like masks.
What'd you say?
He's like screaming about like masks.
I hear you.
I mean, like just the very basic of, okay, we need you to wear a mask when you go into a building. How dare you? How dare you saying you're breaching my liberties?
Yeah, I don't really care about that one either. I'll give it to you.
I mean, it's just insane.
I technically see that as a violation of a civil liberty, I guess, but like I'm willing to go along with that because we're in a state of crisis, and I would rather have that than the economy get locked down. And then I can see why some people are looking at me like, okay, you're letting them hold the gun to your head, and you're just doing what they say, boy. They're telling you they're going to kill you, and you're going to have to wear the mask anyway. How does that feel? I get the argument, but okay, you're wrong, whatever. You know,
I look at the numbers going up. I see the number of people who have dead, and it's like, okay, government doesn't have a role in this. But are you insane? What do you mean government doesn't have a role in this? I mean, what if the companies themselves are the things that are like the shop? What was it? The meat shop, and these guys were doing it was a huge outbreak at that place.
Yeah,
and the outbreak was
slaughterhouse.
The slaughterhouse, and it was basically contributing to the city and everything. Should the government just allow that to pass if a company says, hey, no, I really do want to keep these workers in these places because, you know, I'm safe in my home and I can work remotely and I can just have these. Of course, government is going to get involved in that. Government clearly has a role in this notion of, okay, public safety. Why do you have traffic lights? Why do you have, handicap stickers? Or why do we make provisions for handicapped people when they're going into businesses and whatnot?
Yeah.
Yes, government has a clear purview in this. It's just a weird argument for him to make to be like, it's like, I want my individual liberties, so I don't want get government off my back.
Well,
but this seems so basic.
I hear you, but I don't trust our government, and governments, like people, tend to seize authorities that they're given when they're given them because it gives them more power going forward.
But he's talking about masks.
He's talking about masks. I get it, but even then, there's slippery slope argument has some validity. You just don't. We could go back and forth on this. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, we agree on a lot of the facts here.
Yeah.
It's just we're trying to like. I don't want the government to get out of bounds. You want to make sure people are taken care of, and we can get this thing
And
up
by
in
the
the
way,
bud.
I don't want them either. I tend to be far more libertarian than many lefties on this stuff. I mean, when I'm screaming, First Amendment and all this other stuff, or get off my back, I don't want you to be able to dictate my behavior. Yes, but I do think there's a required basic minimum social context for people to even get to the point of looking at their world and making a choice about what they want to be. And that's where I come in on the notion of, okay, there needs to be a floor. And from the standpoint of that floor, okay, people can fight and make their context and everything else. But without the floor, meaning you got to, people at the very least have a basic thing, or basic living, a basic circumstance, a basic self-actualization, if you want to put a label on it. But that gets, hazy. I guess my basic point is, yes, I tend to trend far more libertarian than a lot of lefties on this stuff. But on this case, yeah, I do think government has a role in saying, all right, we need to keep these numbers down. I don't want 3 million people dying of COVID. I don't want that.
Yeah.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going to be back with Dr. Mikhail Kogan having a conversation about COVID. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We've been having this conversation about COVID over the course of for the last year or more on the show, especially over the last few weeks. And just to give a detailed notation, I mean, for the most part, the overwhelming majority of the people that have been passing are the people who were unvaccinated. I think the numbers are 95% to 99%. And just to give a basic rundown, in Louisiana, 97% of the COVID cases and deaths in February have been unvaccinated people. It's been 20 times more likely to become infected with COVID, meaning the people who are unvaccinated. You have another case in Alabama, over 96% of COVID-19 deaths in April were unvaccinated people. The state health department said 509 deaths out of the 529 total. Over 42% of adults are vaccinated in the country. Los Angeles County, nearly every COVID-19 case, hospitalization, and death is unvaccinated. And I want to go to a doctor, Dr. Mikhail Kogan, and have a conversation about what does it look like in practice, meaning from his standpoint, and does he see any, let's say, skew or any breakdown in the trends that he can discuss? We're bringing on Dr. Mikhail Kogan. He's medical director at George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and founder and executive director of AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. To learn more about the AIM Health Institute, visit healthaim.org. Dr. Mikhail Kogan, thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Nice to be here again.
Absolutely. So we have been going through the numbers for the COVID cases, and I just read a few. I mean, the chart continues. I mean, the stats on this is pretty rough. 98 to 99% plus of the people that are being hospitalized and dying with COVID have not been vaccinated. In Alabama, made up 92.6% of the COVID deaths, meaning the unvaccinated. In Maryland, 100% of the COVID deaths unvaccinated. 95% of the new COVID cases unvaccinated. 93% of the COVID hospitalizations unvaccinated. 97% of Louisiana. And it goes on and on and on. There's a clear trend of the people that are getting sick and the people that are dying are decidedly, overwhelmingly, to a radical degree, unvaccinated. What have you been seeing in your practice dealing with COVID? And have you seen any kind of, I guess, breakdown in regards to, let's say, demographic breakdown in regards to what the people think about it?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a demographic background. Honestly, I think it's a social, in a way, determinants. But, there's also, there are a lot of people who have alternative views on lots of things. Alternative views on health, alternative views on politics, alternative views on, I had a patient a couple of days ago who is going to Europe for part of the summer, and she's quite older, and her reason is she doesn't believe the virus exists. She thinks the whole thing is a hoax, and and she's been my patient for a long time, and I tried to reason with her to some degree, but then at some point you're just realizing people have certain convictions.
Well, wait, she's not getting vaccinated, or you're counseling her to not go to Europe because of her age, because she may be under threat?
I mean, she's an independent human being. I mean, I can't make decisions. Even when I stand by someone and I know they're making a bad decision, it's really not my place to scream and yell. I mean, the humans, when they have full capacity to make the decisions, when they're adults, and there's no psychological problem or some cognitive issue, we see a lot of bad decisions in reality in healthcare. We know people often make choices that are hurting them. And to be honest with you, you have to think of it this way. Why in America, for example, this percent of people who are like that is way higher than in many other countries? Let's take Europe, for example. Why? Well, I mean, it's probably quite complex answer, and I'm not sure I'm actually the best person to try to discuss this, but I have some thoughts on that. And the reality is the messaging that we've been getting, they're very mixed. Look around. I mean,
wait, hang on. Dr. Kogan, agreed on that. I know there was something you said that was uniquely applicable to Jamarl, and it also relates to the conversation we were just having. We also are getting a slightly spotty connection with your phone. So we're going to go into a brief break, try to bring you back on, keep this conversation going. I think I will let Jamarl bring us back, because if my ears were perking up at the right comments, it'll be an interesting conversation. Anyway, we are joined for now and for the next segment by Dr. Mikhail Kogan. He's medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute, Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. I think we're going to be returning talking about the limits of what relationship between doctors and patients.
Yes.
How that dynamic works.
Yes.
And I'll let Jamarl bring us back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're joined with Dr. Mikhail Kogan. We're bringing him back on. We're just having a little bit of trouble loading him, but he'll be back in a moment. He's medical director of the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. It was a conversation, a statement that he made about his patient saying that she didn't necessarily believe in COVID. It wasn't that part. It was this other part of her being an individual and her being older and counseling her to do X or to do Y, and how there are limits to what doctors can do. And this gets to my more libertarian side, where I say, of course there are limits to what they can do. They're hired to perform a task, no more, no less, like a barber or like, a masseuse. But in this case, somebody who has a huge amount of information and is going to try to keep you alive, and you just take their counsel. But that's all there is. There's no more, no less to that. If the patient decides, or the person decides, I'm going to go on the trip and I'm going to blow off medical advice, they can do that. It's their right. Even if that means that person dies. It is their choice. The catch becomes whether or not it's an individual choice that is only going to affect the individual, or if it's going to be a choice that is going to affect others. In the case of COVID, it's a choice that affects others. And so I think that's the demarcation point between those things. If it's a situation where a person says, I am going to take a trip to, I don't know, Tbilisi, Georgia, and Istanbul, and it's going to be X amount of time frame, and there is COVID issues that are associated with it. There may be medical issues associated with it. Your doctor may say, hey, we don't necessarily think that's the best of ideas. Doesn't really matter what the doctor thinks in this case. They're giving you their advice, no more, no less. People sometimes forget that and miss that. I had this really great conversation with a doctor in Kenya. And this was years ago. I think it was when my wife and I were traveling. We were doing this travel around the world. And I get to Kenya, I need treatment. And the doctor is like, all right, so when are you going back to the States? And I was like, I don't know. I think it's like 4 months. And he's like, what? What do you mean 4 months? And him and I sit there and talk for an hour where he's explaining to me how, you know, in my situation, if a person was even trying to go to somebody's wedding, I wouldn't allow it. Oh, great. Dr. Mikhail Kogan, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, excellent. So I was having this conversation about basically this notion of patient individuality and how you were making a point of saying she didn't necessarily believe in COVID. And I was trying to disambiguate, is it that she didn't necessarily believe in COVID, or she just has the sense of independence of, look, I get that I'm older, but I'm a person. I'm going to do X regardless. Is it that more so than the disbelief in COVID? Which one is it?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And it's probably, and sometimes, I think in the case of this patient, I actually do think it doesn't believe in COVID.
Interesting.
And, you know, and honestly, she's not the only one. I have, over the past year or so, have seen several people like this.
I'm curious as to why. I've met people during the time where COVID was killing 5,000 human beings a day, like just dropping dead. And I would go into 7-Eleven and there would be people, one every so often, is, you know, very rare, but without a mask or not wanting to wear a mask. And, you know, it's like I'm standing back and the guy is like, it's okay. And I was like, no, dude, it's not okay. All of these people are dying. And he's like, well, I mean, that's based on your information. I was like, yeah, my information is based on the overwhelming majority of people and looking out the windows and seeing all of these people dying. But in his head, he has alternative, quote unquote, facts.
That's right.
So it's that. I mean, so what did they tell you in regards to, well, we don't believe it's real because of what?
Well, you can't really. I mean, you can try to explain yourself, but at the end of the day, if the person has a strong conviction, the only thing that I can quote unquote unconvince them if something happens to them in their own life.
Right.
Otherwise, your communicating is not going to help. I think this country is been based on this individual right that you can think whatever you want to think. You can believe in whatever you want to believe in. Nobody gonna fault you for that.
How bad has it been for you? Like, meaning for the number of cases. I mean, looking at the stats, we can see, okay, 200% increases, but what does that look like in practice?
Well, I mean, I think we're still not anywhere near where we were some months ago, right? So there is an uptick here in our area. It's not as bad. Partially is that I think this area is better vaccinated than many other places, but, you know, there's some parts of the country, Alabama, Mississippi, where cases are spiking very quickly, and I think it's a matter of time. You know, I'm more concerned, to be honest with you. I've seen a couple of different numbers in terms of the efficacy of the vaccine or continuous efficacy of the vaccines against the Delta variant, and there is some data down to 60-70% and some data closer to 90%. But the reality is there's definitely already cases of infection, thank God they're for now mild infection, through the vaccine. There's been, in Los Angeles, there's been a whole series of hospital workers who got infected. And I think the reality is even in a way scarier, right? We do know that this virus mutates. We already have seen this. It's not a theoretical now, right? It's not a first variant. And what's there to say that the Delta variant will continue to mutate, and then in a month from now, in 2 months from now, we're going to have even lower efficacy of vaccine. I'm sure there's going to be a race to do the boosters that will include the updated virus. But think of it this is what we have with flu, or what we had with flu for decades. So it's starting to feel, and a lot of experts, remember when we started having these conversations a year and a half ago, a lot of experts were telling us that, look, this will turn into the bad flu every season. And this is where it feels like that's where we're going. And now I think it's really up to politicians and the culture to say, look, we have to have a better unified messaging. We do have to accept certain realities and make a decision. And well, if the France made the decision to make a lot of things mandatory, well, we're in America. We don't like mandates, but think of it this way. Let me put one number in perspective, because otherwise, you mentioned 600,000 deaths, but now put it in this way. There is something called life expectancy. So when a human being born, right, they have a certain amount of expected life. For many decades, since the World War II, we've been gradually increasing life expectancy. Pre-COVID, we were heading towards 81, 82 years of life. So this was, let's say, 2019, right? In contrast to some other, like maybe France in mid-80s and Korea for women, it's almost 90. In this last year and a half, we lost almost 2 years of life expectancy. Just to give you a contrast, this is as bad, if not worse, than World War II in terms of what the collective death toll from COVID has taken on this life expectancy.
Now, one note on this, Dr. Kogan. I've been watching that particularly because that's one of the main barometers. If you look at the decline and fall of the Soviet Union, for instance, but I think you can take this as a general case. Looking at a society, at how healthy it is, how long people can live is a pretty good sign of, not just public hygiene, social stability, how many close relationships you have, the quality of the food you're eating. It's a good sign of a lot of different things is my point. And that number had been dropping for a couple of years before COVID hit.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S. specifically. I do not doubt that COVID dropped it even further, and I do not doubt that what COVID did to it was a sharper drop than what we'd seen. But my point is I've been paying attention to that for a few years, and that number had been going down, which is a shame because, of course, before that, it had been going continuously up. And then I'm like, wait, what was the change here? Why did it start to go in the opposite direction? That's another conversation, though. I want to come back to this.
Right.
You said something. You're talking about messaging and how the culture and the politicians have a sort of obligation to have this conversation if they want to actually solve these problems, if they want to educate the public about this. But there are two things here. You compare this to the flu in the sense of getting the shot. The problem with that, I think, and I'll set this up, I'll say something, and then I'll ask you a question, and you can take it off. The problem with that is a lot of people who would get the flu are going to be younger, they're going to be middle-aged, they're going to be old, whatever. There's a sense of like, I could see myself going to get a flu shot simply as a 28-year-old, simply because I don't want to get the flu. I don't want to catch it. I don't want to get sick for a week or two or more and have this problem. With COVID, this disproportionately seems to impact older people. That's what everybody talks about. In other words, the fact that younger people don't want to get this, it might, they might be more likely to get it for the flu just because they're more susceptible to the flu. Whereas COVID, it seems to disproportionately hit the elderly. And on that point, you can disagree with me, agree with me, anything you want to, of course. If you had to take over the messaging on this, big question, broadly, how would you do that? What would you, if you were Fauci, if you were the head of the White House Coronavirus Task Force and you were appointed, to give the public the goods on this stuff, where the plan is, all this, how would you do that, Dr. Kogan?
You have to really do what a lot of countries have done. They basically have hired a dramatic number of local experts and have those people go house to house, literally, if you have to, or organize campaigns where you entrust the information delivery to somebody local. And you literally, you don't have to block certain things, but you do screen for crazy things out there, and you aggressively do that.
What do you mean by that? What kind of crazy things?
Go on YouTube, and you're going to find information that is spread out there that basically saying, it's all hoax, or don't get vaccinated, it'll kill you. Literally, there are people.
Yes, like the vaccine killed Hank Aaron, like that.
There are people in my who are, there's a reason why a lot of patients who have desire to be treated by holistic doctors, there's a high percent within that community who are not getting vaccinated because, many of them have their, expert gurus, so to speak, who are against it, and most of the time what I have observed is that people who are trying to deliver this alternative message, they're just making money on a secondary gain. So they either sell a supplement of some sort that has nothing to do with anything, but they make wrong claims, or they have some other service that gets bought. After people watch something, they believe this idea, and then there is now if you take this product, if you take this herb, it will somehow prevent you from getting COVID. Last week there was an arrest in California. There was a naturopathic doctor who was basically telling people, don't get vaccinated. Here's a bunch of herbs. They will stop any infection. They will cure you if you have one. And if you don't want if you want a vaccine exemption of some sort, so she was making fake cards that people vaccinated. I mean, there's a level of basic trust, right, in a system. And when you have bad players like this, the system has to be able to screen it out quickly and take them out. And, it's not a rocket science.
Well, from your standpoint, because we were having this conversation here about the reach of, let's say, media and their capability to influence opinion. And it came across when we were looking at the studies from Kaiser that it was basically the people who are around them that had the higher propensity for getting a public opinion across. Meaning, I could change this person's mind when it's a friend or it's a family member or it's somebody who they say, okay, I can go out into the community now, or I don't see any negative effects with the vaccine for this particular person. Meaning, it was these kind of familial or social bonds that were the things that were able to influence people a little bit more. How would Biden and his administration use that? I guess what we're trying to get at is, if what he's doing now is not working because the vaccinations have been frozen at 48%, then what does he need to do? And, that becomes a little bit hazier. And I guess we're trying to figure out from your vantage point. I get, like you're saying, the social bonds and everything else in the local communities.
Well, Dr. Kogan, you kind of said like local experts.
Right.
You said, sending out local experts, which kind of, it's another version of that. It's about the closest. Yeah. Who would those people be? Would those be doctors? Are you talking entirely medical professionals? I'm just curious because another way of looking at this is, who do you think can actually influence people on this? Is it going to be the medical doctor? Or is it going to be their pastor? What's your take on this?
Sir, yeah, all of them. All of the people who community entrust a lot of their things in life. It could be an owner of a local car shop where a lot of people going, for what I care.
You're thinking just social pressure in general.
That's right. Well, it's not a pressure. Think of it.
No, it is. I mean, what you're talking about, it is. I mean, if you're saying, okay, get rid of certain kooky ideas, okay, fair enough. And when we're going to get the pastor, we're going to get the guy at the car dealership. I mean, this is basically, it's almost like a civil rights thing where there's a social pressure in a direction. I'm not against that. I mean, especially if you're trying to increase the vaccination rates. On some level, you want a pressure in a direction. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, the pressure. Pressure would be when you literally go to a community and says, you do this or else.
No, I don't think it has to be that overt. I don't think it has to be that overt.
But this is subjective. Is it cool if I want to go one last question before we close with you, Dr. Kogan?
Go for it.
Oh my gosh. Embarrassing. I just had it in my mind and then the question dropped. It will come back to me, I'm sure, very soon here.
Well, Dr. Kogan.
This is what it is. Sorry. The hoax idea, the sort of fake news thing that you were talking about. It seems if there was one core plank of that, it would be this notion that a lot of COVID deaths are being falsely diagnosed, that people are saying that people are dying from COVID even though they're dying from unrelated things. Only so much time to talk about it. 20, 30 seconds. Dr. Kogan, what's your take on that principal stipulation?
Well, I mean, people who don't want to believe it, they'll find a reason not to.
Yeah,
agreed.
They find statistics out there, some studies or experts saying that all these deaths are fabricated, that in reality people die from something else, but hospitals, there's been this thing that was going around for a long time that the hospitals get paid more if they write on the death certificate that there was a COVID or that the doctor gets paid more. So, nonsense like this gets propagated, and it gets propagated for a long time, and you can advocate for it, but in reality, we're hitting the wrong target of advocacy. We think that if we go and have Dr. Fauci talk about this every day, that somehow more people are going to believe it. No, those who already want to believe it, they do.
Good point.
You get the local folks, and coming back to the thing,
Really
I
good
count
point.
that as kind of a peer pressure thing. But I get what you're saying. It's not pressuring. There's not a mandate there. We've got to close this though. Dr. Mikhail Kogan was joining us for this great conversation. He's a medical doctor, medical director of the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, and associate professor of medicine at George Washington University. Also, founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back in just a minute.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Great conversation with Dr. Kogan. Always enjoy having him on the show. He's a wealth of information. But let's get to the headlines. In the news, about 62,012 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 300 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 37,975 cases per day, an increase of 195% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 56% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 34,159,723 people across the United States, a nation without universal health care, and has killed 608,712 men, women, and children in this country. A hospital in Texas has reported its first case of Lambda variant as the state tries to curtail the progress of the Delta variant. Lambda was first detected in Peru. The World Health Organization officials stated that the strain is, quote, a variant of interest, unquote, and that the primary focus was still on Delta as it has a much higher viral load. Basically, a higher transmissibility.
We will all speak ancient Greek by the end of this pandemic, right?
Oh, that's a grim joke, and true. Drug-related deaths in the United States have risen 29% in 2020 from 2019. About 3/4 of the deaths are attributed to opioids, and 83% of those are increasingly popular synthetic opioids. The biggest perpetrator is fentanyl, which is far more dangerous, more potent, and more common than heroin. Largely attributed to the pandemic, drug use in America has gone up dramatically, sending the drug-related death counts to over 93,000 in 2020 compared to 70,000 the year prior. One of the interesting things about this article, it gets into the ludicrous policies that we've taken in regards to drug policy. That we say, all right, because opioids is an issue, we're now going to make laws against opioids. Well, hey, why were people taking the opioids in the first place? Do you think that there was a primary mover there, that the people are just going to move on to something else, which they did, which was fentanyl, which was far more dangerous, far more potent, far more deadly? Yes, the policies that we've come up with to deal with drugs have not worked, have decidedly failed. This was in Reason magazine, and it was a great article. Not to mention the people who actually do need the medication have a harder time getting their hands on it.
Arguably also lockdown stuff, though.
It is lockdown stuff. I mean, people are far more in. They're more insulated. They're dealing with depression and everything else from social bonds and everything else. So no, I feel you on that. But the article decidedly points at this notion of the policies that they've changed and everything else, and the reasons why people went to one drug over another.
Yeah.
And that type of stuff.
Totally.
But no, lockdowns, of course. You know, if you're stuck in a house and you have this kind of emotional
I want to come back to this at some point.
Yeah, cool. All right. A California couple is being charged with involuntary manslaughter after their gender reveal party started a massive fire in California last year. 13 people were injured, 5 homes. I'm not laughing at the people who've been injured or the people who are, hurt. I'm laughing at the gender reveal party being the thing that set off this massive
Good thing
wildfire.
you made that clear.
Yeah.
There are crowds waiting in the wings with pitchforks and torches to be like,
it's like,
Jamarl, you left
Russian media is
laughs
advocating
it.
for the death. Right.
No, that's all.
A California couple is being charged with involuntary manslaughter after their gender reveal party started a massive fire in California last year.
Wait, you just read this?
Well, no, but I didn't read.
Oh, you're continuing.
Entire,
Sorry.
Yeah. 13 people were injured, 5 homes, 15 buildings were destroyed, and firefighters Chris Morton lost his life. The couple also faces 29 counts spanning over 3 different charges related to the illegal use of fire. Illegal use of fire. Gender reveal parties have been responsible for the fatal plane crash, party-goer deaths, multiple wild and brush fires, and involuntary pipe bombs. Wow, that's so weird. And it's so trivial to have caused so much
gender
damage.
reveal party?
Yeah, it's so trivial to have caused that much.
I'm in some ways I'm totally culturally out of touch. I had no idea before, like last year, there was this big gender reveal party. I didn't know it was a thing either. People do this, and I'm like, why now? I thought that this was the day and age where everybody was like, let's wait and see on gender. You know what I mean?
There's a minority that does the whole wait and see stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is definitely a minority, but it's seeped into the culture. My point is, it's the time. Anyway.
Yeah, it's just so trivial to cause so much damage. That's amazing.
Yeah.
On September 12th of last year, a right-wing extremist group attempted a kidnapping plot of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Whitmer's crime was imposing COVID restrictions on the state. The group joined by one undercover agent, one informant, both working for the FBI. The men claimed that they were targeted for their political beliefs, and the FBI illegally engaged in entrapment. The state, the government agency, is responsible for masterminding the plot, encouraging anti-government sentiment and military-style training. Many are looking at this as a win for law enforcement in their efforts to stop domestic terrorism. Others are taunting this as an outrageous government overreach that incites radicalization because law enforcement is shamelessly infiltrating anti-government groups. Now, this is interesting on so many counts, and we can come back to it because this gets into what is entrapment. I mean, it's that part. And where is that line of, okay, this is entrapment versus not entrapment? Are the agents pushing people to take certain actions? And, we'll come back to it because this has a huge thing in lefty groups, especially African-American groups, going back to the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Panthers, and those type of things, the way government was working to undermine these groups. They saw it as their job for the protection of the nation and that type of thing. And so if that same mentality is going through, well, that's kind of a through line in regards to behavior. I just thought this was a fascinating story, but let's keep going. The Australian government is reporting on local cases of Havana syndrome among diplomats in the U.S. Embassy. Named for the capital of Cuba, where American and Canadian diplomats first reported syndromes of mysterious illness back in 2016, Havana syndrome involved hearing strange noises, headaches, hearing loss, memory loss, and nausea. The illness or illnesses were blamed on suspected microwave attacks by Cubans, which would fail to explain why diplomats are now suffering from these syndrome in Australia or Austria. Microwave attacks. That's where we're at. 3 research institutions in Italy released a report several weeks ago in which they pushed back on the narrative that China is guilty of genocide in the treatment of Uyghurs. The Italian Institute for Politics, Society, and Economics, the Italian Institute for International Diplomacy, and the Italian Eurasian Mediterranean Research Center wrote a report.
And I believe we'll be talking about this with Manila Chan later.
Yeah, we will.
At 8:30 about.
Because like we pushed back on this notion before, having a re-education camp is not the same thing as genocide.
No, it's pretty bad. I don't like it. I don't like it.
Well, yeah, you could say, I don't like this, but this is not the same thing as Nazis. Like, meaning when AOC, for example, would say, well, Donald Trump has camps. Well, okay, but you're trying to make this look like it's a Nazi thing. And it's bad. They don't have soap. I think it's horrendous, but it's not Nazis. It's that. It's this, this disambiguation between the two when conflation is the thing that is the point in doing so. But let's keep going. Biden is set to nominate Jonathan Cantor to lead the Justice Department's antitrust division. Cantor is an antitrust lawyer and is expected to improve Biden's surprisingly trust-busting oriented selections in key positions so far. Last month, Biden named Nina Khan to lead the Federal Trade Commission, and earlier this year, Biden named Tim Wu to the National Economic Council, each of whom has spoken out against continued consolidation of power in the tech industry. The phones of French President Emmanuel Macron and and over a dozen of his government, and people within his government may have been targeted by the Moroccan government. The phone numbers for the 16 officials were found among
the list of 50,000 phone numbers that was released. This, of course, has to do with NSO Group. Exactly, and their Pegasus malware service that they were providing to countries. In the report that released this whole thing this weekend, we'd known about Pegasus before, but there was a big report on this weekend. The big list they came out with was this list of 50,000 phone numbers, basically thought to be targeted by NSO Group.
3 presidents, 10 prime ministers, and a king were among those targeted by the Pegasus spyware licensed by the private Israeli technology firm NSO Group, according to the Washington Post and partner news organizations in 10 countries. The Guardian reports that Morocco, Rwanda, Mexico, India, the UAE were some of the countries that used the Pegasus spyware to surveil world leaders. The NSO Group has denied that Macron was targeted by the spyware. Rwanda, Morocco, and India have denied involvement in spying on journalists and politicians. Of course, because they're, you're using this clandestine spyware. The first thing you're going to do is admit to using the clandestine spyware. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. So, yeah, the spyware, the Pegasus thing, I think it's phenomenally interesting that we are not associating this with the Israeli government. How weird is that?
It's true.
Nobody came out and said, all right, Israel is going to need to be held responsible for this spy agency that is basically trying to spy on everybody that he could get his hands on. Meaning everybody was fair game. I mean, the fact that Macron and all these other world leaders and everything else, it didn't seem like they were being all that selective in who they were passing this out to. And certainly not. I mean, for God's sake, I strongly suspect that just like our agencies here in the United States, it will be in the Israeli government's best interest to create a spy agency just like this. Meaning, if this place didn't exist, they were in the negative for not doing it. If that makes sense. Meaning, why wouldn't you want a clandestine agency that can do and get information like this, where you may have this kind of backdoor into it? Israeli government had to approve all of this stuff because all of these things were considered like weapons and whatnot.
And here's the thing. It's not just not blaming the Israeli government for this and immediately blaming. Think about it on this level, because I'm kind of saying the same thing, but in a slightly different way. They're more willing to immediately connect the Russian government to random Russian hackers and the Chinese government to apparently random Chinese hackers. They're more willing to say these are state-sponsored or state-connected hacking groups, cyber criminal hacking groups. They don't do that with Israel, even though it seems like there's far more evidence. They have to approve it. There's far more evidence. Exactly.
Yeah, it is like, so wait, they have to approve this? And you still aren't making the connection? And it's like, so are you telling me that the Israeli government has no benefit to having this institution in their now, off the table, they don't even make the connection between those two. But like you said, with Russia and China, it would be immediate. Russia has these hackers, et cetera. It's like, how are you making the connection? I mean, the entire Russiagate thing was based on supposedly a private company that had every incentive in the world to put out basically ads because that's how it made its revenue. Meaning, if we were having an election, why would you be having a Thanksgiving ad? No, you would be having an ad on elections. It would run in parallel, just like we talk about election stuff when there's an election. And yet they took that and said, okay, despite the fact that these firms have every incentive in the world to put this stuff out, this is immediately connected with the Russian government. It is immediately an attempt to overturn American democracy. And it's like, what? I remember Chris Hayes had this guy to come on after they basically had this historical person coming on, acting like this was 9/11 and everything else. And after a lot of criticism, Chris Hayes had a guy come on. He says, look, these things are basically farms that are just trying to get clicks. They're clickbait farms.
Yeah.
And he says, that's all it is, no more, no less. You guys are making this stuff out to be something else. And that, of course, didn't become the prevailing notion for Democrats, meaning that commentary. Meaning, is there any incentive in the world for a clickbait farm to put out clickbait? Oh, yeah, of course it is. But they're connecting this to the Russian government. In this very specific case, there is every incentive in the world for Israel to have this in their country, to take advantage of the fact that it's in their country and to potentially get information about it.
I hear you. That might be slight evidence in favor of it being connected to the Israeli government, but for me, it's not enough.
Necessarily evidence.
It's not evidence, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I just want to clarify. That's not. I don't therefore believe that, because the same would apply to any other government. Yeah. Any other government has the same incentive. But,
exactly.
But it does seem to apply to Israel. And the thing with it is, when we connect Russia to Russian hackers and China to Chinese hackers, even when you're just in suspicion that there is a connection there, it's obvious why we do that. We do it because it's in our interest geopolitically, because we can condemn them for doing this, and we don't want to condemn Israel for doing it.
Exactly.
But I guess maybe one way to look at this, whenever we're having these conversations about nation states being involved in cyber criminal activities or influencing other countries' elections, there is one nation now that is clearly, very clearly, apparently at the top of the list, which is Israel.
Yeah.
Right?
How could it not be?
Behind the United States, arguably.
Yeah, but how could it not be at this point?
That's the thing.
I mean, because the document was making the point that said the moment that they came out with the fact that, like, the U.S., like Edward Snowden, and it was like, the U.S. has that level of capability? Oh, my God.
And the U.K. apparently was worse.
Yeah. And so at that point, it became, all right, well, how do we get this level of capability? Hey, we can give you a poor man level of an NSA.
Yeah.
We get a poor man NSA. And so a capitalistic company comes up and says, hey, we will meet this need and demand for XYZ. And the catch is this the only company of cyber mercenaries?
Nah, they're probably just the most popular, though.
I don't believe that they're the only company
most
at all.
Successful.
Yep.
One quick note, randomly, when we were talking about Pegasus yesterday, it was really heartening to see this. I checked in on Twitter late last night, and there was like somebody who frequently comments on the show who was like, great conversation. You guys should clip that. You recommend that we pull multiple segments, stitch them together into a clip to post on YouTube, because they were like deep, informed conversation. You guys did a very good job. Thank you. I forget your name exactly, WMUSA or something. But thank you for saying that. I remember seeing this last night.
Well, it's a fascinating story. I mean, we were basically talking about spyware that these guys were using to infiltrate whoever. Everybody was fair game. I mean, the way this list looks is like everybody's like, except America. Except America. We had a special privilege.
We have the literal number one, the +1 international phone code.
And that makes me think like, okay. So you guys are telling me that A, the government didn't know anything about it, and B, the U.S. got a special privilege for it, and C, the U.S. is shocked and chagrined that there's gambling in this establishment. Meaning, the fact that you're saying that the U.S. gets this kind of special pass on this makes me think that the U.S. knew something about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's so over the top. It's so weird. It's like, unless there's some kind of cosmic, God-honest thing in the basic of technological development that prevents the one number from getting, then yeah. And then it's like, but what about Americans overseas? No. If you're an American overseas with a foreign number, you're fair game, just like anybody else. This was a fascinating story, And the fact that they don't connect to Israel is amazing. The other one, the Microsoft Exchange hack one, that's the one we're going to get into, Manila Chan also. So we might as well bring her on, might as well close. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Oh, wait.
Joe Siegel.
Right, Joe Siegel's coming for, that's right. We've reorganized the way we've done this one for this segment. All right, we're going to come back with Joe Siegel. I want to have a conversation about infrastructure and the politics of infrastructure. It's far more interesting than it sounds. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So we've been following and we've been having this conversation on basically what has been taking place in our political space in regards to the Democrats trying to move the infrastructure bill forward. Now, as I explained, there were two parts to this. There is the $600 billion that is kind of a group between Democrats and Republicans where they're supposed to be able to overcome the 60-vote threshold. But there's also the reconciliation bill where they are putting everything in the kitchen sink in that bill, including immigration coverage. So the catch becomes, what is taking place? Is this going to be able to move forward? Are the Republican Party, or is the Republican Party going to be okay with this massive reconciliation bill on one side while also allowing a win for Biden, who is touting bipartisanship, on the other? To have a conversation with us, we're joined with Joel Siegel. Joel Siegel is a former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for the passage of the Affordable Care Act. He is co-founder and national director for the Justice Action Mobilization Network and nationwide multiracial climate action network. Joel, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Top of the morning, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Which is the top of the morning indeed. So, all right. So the politics of this. Joe Biden is trying to stuff some of everything into the reconciliation bill. Are Republicans going to give him the bipartisan win? Because what it looks like is if the bipartisan deal falls apart and there's questions on how they're going to pay for it, that seems to be unclear. Whether or not they're going to allow this kind of increase in gas tax, Democrats are saying no. But again, the question of how you're going to pay for it comes into play. Republicans have seemed to be hardening their positions on whether they're going to raise taxes and those type of things. So are they going to give Biden his win on the bipartisan angle? And if not, what is going to happen with this reconciliation bill when they try to stuff the $600 billion into that reconciliation bill?
Great question. Well, first of all, we got to thank Senator Bernie Sanders and the Progressive Our Revolution movement for the most progressive bills I've ever seen since I've been working in Congress for a long time. And free community college. I never thought I would see that in a congressional bill.
Child tax credit.
And that utility companies, use clean renewable energy in a pretty rapid transition. I've never seen that in a bill. What I think is going to happen is the hard infrastructure bill will get passed. There's going to be issues with how you're going to fund it. But I do think that the reason why I do think it will get passed is Republicans don't want their constituents to be driving a car and then the bridge falls over. And there's a lot of jobs that are going to be created in districts, Republican districts that have been hit hard by COVID-19. So for their reelection purposes, I think they'll get passed. How will they fund it? That is going to be the more contentious issue. And we all know what the problem is. The Biden is saying they want to increase the IRS budget so that they can, look at people who are not paying their taxes. They're looking at about $100 billion.
Hey, Joe, let's do this. You're breaking up on us. So we're going to get the engineers to just call you right back. And just be a moment. Just quick flip over. Yeah, so I can understand that, right? I mean, Mitch McConnell was out there basically saying, touting the bill that he didn't back. Basically saying, yeah, it's going to put a lot of money in the community and everything else, but no, I don't back it, blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah, there's something to be said for, okay, they're going to pass one. How are you going to pay for it? Seems to be interesting, though, because initially Biden was like, he's going to raise taxes. Okay, fair enough. But then Republicans are like, yeah, we're not for that. Now, the catch becomes, if you want their bipartisan support, what are you willing to do to get it? And what are you willing to accept to get it? And so if they say, well, we need to raise a gas tax, if that's where our stand is, we don't change that. How much do you want to be bipartisan, Joe Biden? Like, that's where you get into problems where you're like running a campaign on bipartisanship. It's just nonsense. You get bipartisanship when you win and you drag them to your position, kicking and screaming, because anything else is just, And I would say that the bipartisan bill that they're trying to pass is indicative of that.
I thought that's what we wanted, though. I thought that stable, bipartisan, unproductive stability. And I know that I repeated myself there, but I know what you mean. Yeah, I thought that was what we were going for, not like a new FDR. Joel, am I wrong there?
Tell me what you're saying.
Pardon me. We were just talking about how Biden. I'm making the case we didn't expect Biden, I don't remember anybody saying Biden's going to be a Bernie Sanders or whatever, except for some Republicans.
Yeah.
But I don't, he wasn't supposed to be an FDR or a new FDR. He was supposed to bring stability to the country, which if you're going to do it and you're not going to be tyrannical about it, means bipartisanship, not getting that much done, but trying to calm things down, lower tensions, something like that. At least you can criticize that analysis, but wasn't that what he was supposed to come in to do? Joel?
I mean, I think, great question. I mean, I'm a student in FDR, and FDR was one of the most bipartisan presidents that we've ever had in our nation's history. And he was I can't remember, 3 or 4 terms. The New Deal and the WPA was passed, resoundingly bipartisan. So apparently Biden did read a book about Roosevelt's first 100 days and was very influenced by that. But no, I think that he was elected by, in a plus margin of 7 million votes, and they did expect him to run and to, govern as, an FDR-like president, because he ran on that. And I think what we're talking about now is there's going to be much more stability in the country if you have bridges that aren't going to fall down. And
Agreed. And on the hard infrastructure specifically, the problem was a couple months ago, depending on your exact definitions, but if you're talking roads and rail, that kind of thing, it was like $100 billion, and this was in the original bill. That's, out of a much, much, much larger bill. That's certainly going to draw Republican support. Then the question, of course, becomes where do you get the funding from? But regardless, with FDR, maybe we don't want to get caught up in this tangent, but was he really that bipartisan? Didn't he pack the Supreme Court, and aren't his policies recognized notoriously as quite controversial in the history of the American 20th century? A lot of Republicans to this day oppose them, seem like they did at the time. I mean, not Republicans, but...
I mean, Eisenhower basically said the New Deal is the way forward, and if you're not going to be part of it, get out the country.
Supreme Court backing. I mean, that on its own, you have to do that when you don't have the majority you need, right? So isn't that itself a clear darn sign that he didn't have the support he needed?
Well, the Supreme Court was shutting down it's that. I mean, but that's a different branch. But Joel.
The history is clear. Roosevelt was very successful in getting America out of the Great Depression, just as Obama's policies were successful in getting us out of the Depression in 2000.
No, Joel, right there. Because Biden even makes this case that they think that Obama didn't go far enough, that they think that it was so modest, and that modesty basically set a paveway for Trump to take in because the public wasn't necessary, meaning he didn't get his hope and change because he was so modest in what he went for. It was the modesty of it all that they think even in some cases paved way for Trump.
I was in Congress at the time, so I'm telling you, as someone who was there, what happened was when the Republicans took over the Congress in his second term, they blocked the American Jobs Act, which was one of the most progressive bills I have ever seen. And actually, I had something to do with that bill in terms of what was in it, and it got blocked. It was very similar to the bills that we're seeing right now on infrastructure, but
Joe, why did he lose his majorities? Why did he lose his majorities? I mean, meaning.
I think.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that the reason why Democrats lose majorities, in my opinion, is that the party will run these kind of white women, moderate lawyers who have a lot of money, who cannot get the black vote or the Hispanic vote or the student vote out, unlike what happened in Georgia where they had 2 progressive senators. I don't think Congress is lost or won by a president's policies. They're lost and won on the candidate who is running and whether or not they appeal to communities of...
But is that true, though? I mean, Bill Clinton was in office. I mean, you had Democrats who basically held Congress for 50 years, with the exception of maybe 2 terms. Bill Clinton gets in office and is passing one right-wing policy after the next. And this guy, he loses Congress. Meaning it starts to go back and forth in this kind of flip-flop way the moment that you had these kind of third-way Democrats take power. The president's policies, on some level, set the tone and the tenor for what the public believes the party represents. It has the effect, the midterms. Do you disagree with that?
No, I don't disagree with that, but Congressman Conyers used to say, Siegel, if members of Congress or those running would actually run on what they believe in and don't be afraid to say it, they would win every time. But, I'm working very closely, and actually I'm writing a book with the folks who organized the Georgia Miracle, and these are black leaders in mainly the rural areas actually 19 counties. And what we learned in the book is that with relational organizing, when you go to the people, go to the barbershops, go into the communities, knock on doors, tell people you're going to get a $1,400 check if you vote Democrat, that's how you win elections. I think
of course. I mean, of course. If you tell people I'm going to give you $2,000 to vote for me, they're going to vote for you. I guess I'm trying to get more to this point that, yes, the president and what the president does matters. Obama had a supermajority in the Senate for a period of time. He had the House and he had the presidency. And the catch becomes, like you made the point, he lost it. And I'm making the point that part and parcel to the reason that he lost it is because it was no drama Obama. It wasn't, Obama had a mandate in the literal sense of a mandate, and he didn't use it. That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, okay. I think there's some truth. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, his first term was getting the Affordable Care Act passed, which my history on that.
And then they didn't fight for it. Then they dropped it like a hot potato, and every last Democrat ran away from it.
Well, he was going to drop it because of Rahm Emanuel was saying that it would, we'd lose the midterms if you got it passed. And I had to spearhead the effort. I don't think I've ever talked about this in public, but I spearhead the effort to make sure that there were enough votes to get it passed and to put enough pressure on Obama and Emanuel to make sure that they would not withdraw the Affordable Care Act because they were going to do it. And all that being said, that was one of the greatest achievements in the history of this country. It wasn't Medicare for all.
Look, I agree.
You can discount. Yeah,
I don't discount it. I think it broke the I think we had this kind of weird taboo in this country about universal health care. And for Republicans screaming that Obamacare was, the takeover of health care, et cetera, the fact that he got it passed, I think it did break the consciousness of this nation of, oh, wait, we can do this. We can have this. I think it sets the tenor. So I'm not undercutting or denigrating it. I'm making the point that you guys passed it and ran from it. Like ran.
But here's the thing. I mean, Obama was recovering from the late Bush financial recession that started us off talking about Obama just a couple of minutes ago. In a weird way, aren't we still not even recovering? We're still in the midst of a similar crisis. Yeah. And, just in the fact that it's a crisis, a big crisis striking our nation. Are we really going to get anything done in that mode? Like Obama failed to get anything done in the mode of his first term when he was doing the recovery things. Does that make sense? I think it does.
It does. Well, here's the problem. We have a recalcitrant right-wing Republican Senate of, aging, rich, octogenarian white males who are afraid that if they pay for infrastructure or the soft infrastructure, they will lose their donors. And we have to really have an honest discussion about this because what we're talking about and paying for legislation is increasing the capital gains tax, increasing some taxes on those making over $400,000. This is not radical stuff, okay? In the 60s, 70s, 40s, 50s, it was bipartisan to have higher tax rates on corporations. But, when you got to raise $30 million to win a Senate seat, which is why we need publicly financed campaigns, people are missing out on the more important conversation. Why are Republicans opposed to plans that are going to actually really dramatically help their constituents? It's because they're afraid that their donors will be taxed at a higher rate and that they themselves will be paying higher taxes because many of them, they make about $286,000 a year or something. But this, to me, is what I think is going on. And then in conclusion, the people have to get more involved, the constituents, in calling their members of Congress and saying, we know that you're opposed to this, these infrastructure bills. However, we're for it. That's also something that is missing in politics today. And that's calling your member of Congress, meeting with them and demanding that they pass policies that are for the people. I don't think either of these bills are so liberal and left-wing. I mean, there's nothing in either bills that's going to prevent 11 million people from being evicted over the next few months. The CDC has lifted their ban on evictions. 1 out of 4 renters are in arrears with their rent. That's not in there. It's a pretty good bill. I wouldn't call it the most left-wing progressive bill in the history of mankind. It's just that we have old, aging, conservative white males who don't want to see it pass. because they want their donors to give them a big check when they run again. It's disgusting. Disgusting what this country is in terms of its, raising money for campaigns. It's immoral.
I agree. I'm just disgusted at both sides. And I don't know.
I'm disgusted at both sides.
We might want to close this one out.
Let's close it. But I don't think it's just conservatives. I put it that way. I mean, because right now, Democrats have 51 votes. If Biden, 30 seconds, I'm sorry. But right now, Joe Biden, his language is not necessarily matching what he's doing. So he would get out there, give a speech about voting rights and everything else, and yet he's not going to do what's necessary for the filibuster to get rid of it, to push that stuff through. He ran a campaign where he was talking about all of these items, $15 an hour minimum wage, the PRO Act, et cetera. I agree with you. The child tax credit is phenomenal, and some of the stuff that's in the bill is phenomenal. But they've stuffed all this stuff under budget reconciliation. Immigration should not be under budget reconciliation because they don't want to go through the main thing of saying, okay, we're going to get rid of the filibuster in order to enact this agenda. And so it's like, it's not just Republicans. Right now, and even during Obama era, this was a thing of Democrats. They had the votes for this stuff. They just don't use it and articulate their power. That's why it always rubs me when I hear people bring in Republicans. Republicans are doing their job. They're functioning for their donors. What's the Democrats' excuse?
Not right, either one of these bills. This is some of the most progressive, pro-American, pro-family, pro-individual legislation that we've ever seen in decades. The Republicans didn't draft that. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party did. I think both bills will be passed. The problem is the filibuster, but we're not going to see Biden coming out against the filibuster because he knows that Manchin is against it. I think Biden will support an end of the filibuster once reconciliation and all these processes are over. He has to have Manchin as that 50th vote to get anything passed. But I do agree with you about him not coming out against the filibuster strong enough. I think he's being tactical. I don't like it, but I think that's what's happening.
The voice that you guys are listening to is Joe Siegel. Joe Siegel is a former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act. He is co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network, nationwide multiracial climate action network. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're joined by Manila Chan, veteran news anchor and host of RT America's daily news program, In Question. Follow her on Twitter at Manila Chan, on Facebook at Manila Chan Reports, and watch her show In Question on RT America. Manila, thanks for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Hey guys, back at the grind at the studio.
Are ya? How's it going? You're off this week though, right? How's it going?
No, we're back to regular programming.
Oh, both weeks. You guys are both on full time. You and Rick Sanchez, right?
Yes.
That is awesome. Congratulations. How's that full time return been going for you?
It's been rough. It's been rough.
That's too bad. How so?
Called post-pandemic normal life. I mean, what is that, right? Like post-pandemic normal schedule. What is that?
Well, it's like you're leaving the house for the first time after a year, and you're getting back to work, and it's like, oh man, my body is not. It's like it doesn't function this way anymore.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, I think a lot of people feel that kind of pain right now. They're like, "What? We're all coming back?"
It's the big Monday. We're all coming back to work after a year off or something like that.
Yes, it's been like 2 weeks of Monday.
Exactly. Okay, Manila. let's get into it. I want to go into the conversation we were just having, just to hit it a little bit more, because we kind of went on. We're going to be following up, talking about China, this breach of Microsoft Exchange, the U.S. blaming China for it, and interestingly enough, how this relates to the NSO group, U.S. not blaming the Israeli government, even though there are connections with the NSO group. After all, it's an Israeli company, and the government has to approve a lot of the stuff they're doing. We'll be coming back to that. But first, on this infrastructure bill, it seems like this has been an exercise in disappointment for like months now. But I question whether they ever wanted to get anything done. I don't know that we've talked about this with you before, Manila. I don't know where you fall on this. When it comes to this infrastructure bill, the latest of these larger legislative packages that has been shrunk down, week after week.
You mean the bipartisan one?
Exactly, the bipartisan one. Where do you think they wanted to take this? Was there ever any hope in their minds, or was this just a fluke? What do you think, Manila?
No, I don't. I think it was all doomed from the get-go. I mean, first of all, even during the Trump administration when they were discussing all of this, so this is a bipartisan issue, obviously, because Trump was Republican. Now we have a Democrat in office. But whenever infrastructure is discussed, you have all these interests being filtered through either from the Democrats or the Republicans and their personal interests, their pet projects. And this is not a criticism specifically or an indictment specifically on Democrats, but when this is just done, right, on Capitol Hill, that when you're trying to push through something called infrastructure, nobody sticks to the basics. They attach all these riders, they attach all of these other bills that have nothing to do with anything, when you literally have bridges collapsing right here in Washington, D.C., right, these pedestrian footbridges. That could have been a disaster. I mean, it just kind of fell at the right time, where literally no car was underneath it and no people were on top walking. I mean, it was just the right time. So why can we not stick to infrastructure when you have places like Flint, Michigan, and numerous other rural areas like in the Appalachian area where they don't have running water, and those who have running water have lead in the pipes. They have other diseases coming through their pipes that they're drinking. This is what we're exposing our people to. So it's a problem for both sides in the House and in the Senate, obviously, that nobody can stick to just make it bare bones. And it's because nobody wants to stomach taking multiple different bills to the floor. So they just want to all ram it all in, pack it all in, call it infrastructure. And this is why nothing gets done.
Well, I don't know if it's that straightforward. I mean, one side clearly wants to put a bunch of stuff in the bill. I mean, there are two bills. There's the bipartisan bill that Joe Biden seems to be, this fetish for bipartisanship. And there's the other bill where they've just said, screw Republican support. We're going to pass a $3.5 trillion bill through budget reconciliation. And we're throwing everything in our mama and the kitchen sink in that bill, and we're going to call it infrastructure, human infrastructure, whatever infrastructure, we're going to call it infrastructure. Is that, I got to be honest, I don't have a huge issue with that. I'm not a big fan of the bipartisanship anyway. From my standpoint, your job is to get elected, and your job is to deliver for the American population. And if one of the sides, or if my opposition is trying to stop me from doing that, and if I have a group of us that agree, then we're going to do what we agree on. We won. That's the entire point. Elections have consequences. That was true when Trump got in office, and he passed that massive tax giveaway to the rich and increased the taxes of my wife and I and the poor. And so this is not, I'm not bothered by that. I'm more bothered by this fetish for bipartisanship. I mean, because think of it this way. How are they going to pay for that? Let's say you got the bill that you wanted that was only infrastructure. And Republicans say, well, we want to raise a gas tax. And in order for it to be bipartisan, we want to raise the gas tax. What do you do with that?
Was that a real question?
That's a real question. I mean, because what I'm asking is, it's like the bipartisanship thing. I understand this want where people can come together and this kind of kumbaya. Like this stuff didn't used to be controversial. But now it's like, okay, we want to raise a gas tax. The gas tax things was the thing that started the Yellow Vest movement in France. And, just there's other things to it, but basically it's an underlying current. And so it's like, how do you get bipartisanship in a situation where one side is just like, yeah, we don't want to increase taxes, period.
Right. Right.
So how do you get the bipartisan, meaning how do you get your infrastructure bill, even if it was just bare bone infrastructure, when one side says, I don't want to increase taxes at all?
I mean, well, I think that speaks to the bigger problem. I mean, not that I'm not a fan of bipartisanship, and I don't mean towards the bill. I just mean for people reaching across the aisle and working with one another instead of saying I'm red team, blue team. I am not a fan of that. I think Congress has just progressively gotten worse and worse and worse over every generation, right? Every decade, it's just gotten worse to the point that we are now stagnated. And nobody can make a move any which way without it, finger pointing and say, well, I can't move because that guy did that to me or that woman did that, and they're holding up this bill. So for me, I mean, when I say bipartisanship, I mean literally working together, right? But I see your point, Jamarl. I mean, absolutely, there are consequences to these elections, and you kind of deal with it as you go. So I can understand why you want to push, the winning party, the prevailing party in this case is the Democrats, and why they have the power to do it, and there will be consequences, and I think that's what the Republicans are focusing on. So I'm not even sure that the American people fully support pushing everything through, because while the Democrats want to accomplish the things on their priority list, on their agenda, and they have the right to do so. I'm not finger pointing that they shouldn't do this, but the consequences on the street is what we should be considering, and I'm not sure there's anyone in Congress has actually thought that out. Like, what happens when you have fuel charges, the taxes on fuel, for example, like I'm a Californian. I mean, do you know what the gas prices are out there? The cost of living?
Well, I'm against that, but that's precisely my point. Precisely my point. The fuel charge or increasing fuel tax should be a non-starter right off the bat. Right. But if Republicans are saying, well, this is what we need for a bipartisan bill and to move forward, where do you go with that? Like, do you just say, okay, that's a non-starter, we need to just go around them? Or do you say, okay, the bipartisanship thing is a non-starter because of that particular, meaning it's a bomb. It's a time bomb. It's something that you put into a particular part of negotiation that you know the other side is not going to allow, with the hope that, okay, well, they're going to have to give us something significant to get rid of that, or it kills it in and of itself. That's what I'm asking you. That's what I'm saying. The problem with bipartisanship in the time period that we're in is that it's stuff like that. It's like, where do you go with that? Like you said, the cost of tax in California is obscene. There is no way they should use that as an increase. By the same token, the increase in taxes didn't used to be controversial either. Shane.
General points on this, and we might want to pivot pretty soon here. So I think follow up on this a little bit, but we'll talk about China in just a minute here. This whole Microsoft Exchange breach that's been levied against the Chinese government. Mm-hmm. Speaking within the rules of the game here, and this is like a grand gladiatorial combat or something like that it seems like we're watching, even though it weighs heavily on our interests and our lives and everything. It's like trial by combat where these two are fighting. And sometimes, every other presidential term, one has the lead, then the other has the lead. Midterms change things pretty often. My point is, it seems like a game, and it seems like, again, continuing the parable or the allegory or whatever, they're constantly hurting each other. They're constantly treating each other as adversaries. They're each getting weaker as time goes on. All they're trying to do is keeping each other from making any progress. And all the while, we who compose the political system, us citizens of this country, we're living under the system that's keeping itself from getting anything done. And it's built into it, and I don't see any way out of it. And that's the membrane of the game. I don't know how else to put it.
Well, what I would say just one thing. From my standpoint, I really don't care about the red and blue part. What I care about is, okay, how do you get things done? How do you get things accomplished? And what do you get accomplished? That's all I really care about. There are times where Democrats are doing stuff where I'm like, oh my God, that's horrendous. And there are times where Republicans I say, oh my God, that's horrendous. There are times where Trump got in office and says, yes, he is less inclined for war. I applaud that. So it's not a red-blue stuff. I care more so about, okay, there's a tax credit that are going to people or kids that universal $300.
Totally. No,
great.
I get it.
And me,
I
don't care about the, I don't care who pushed that through.
I didn't bring up the red or the blue. I don't think I said Democrat or Republican either. My point is, you could look at, and I could bring it into specific facts. Nancy Pelosi blocking Trump's bills consistently. She was leading the cause for that last year. And then what do we get? Well, we get Republicans blocking anything the Democrats try to put forward. Yeah. That's par for the course. That's my point. That's how the game works. And we're all talking about the rules of the game, or what would make sense for the players to do rationally. What would be good for the American people is if they weren't caught in this downward spiral of death or something like that. And
guys, can I interject?
Yeah, please, Manila.
The whole problem there is that neither side, red team nor blue team, are talking with one another before it gets to a bill. Before that, your team pushes a bill out to the floor. Why are these people not discussing with? Because I could tell you, because I know people on the Hill, there are grown adults in Congress that are literally harassing their colleagues on the other team. They're actively harassing one another instead of actually trying to befriend one another. I mean, there are problems literally at the gym on Capitol Hill.
Because they want to get reelected, and they know their constituents are watching, and if they get an especially tasty dig in, then that's my guess at least.
That's so unfortunate.
But am I wrong or am I right? What do you think?
Yes, I think right now, because that is the environment the media has put forth. That is, everybody's riled up for one team over the other, and the people we have put on Capitol Hill that should be the grown-ups in the room, and by the room I mean the country, are literally being kids in a sandbox and going, "This is my toy. I'm taking it home. I'm not playing with you."
I think my feel is that's so aggravating because it gets to the theatrics of it when there's a reality to it. Like, when I made the point about the $300 child credit, that's a big deal. Like, my mom didn't make, if we got $300 a month that was free and clear without any obligations and everything else like that, life-changing. Like, that would have been like half of her paycheck, to put it in perspective. Like, it's a significant amount of money to somebody who's not making much money at all. And so it's like, you see something like that and be like, yeah, I don't care who passed that. That's a great thing. That's a good thing. And you had, if I'm not mistaken, some Republicans that weren't necessarily against doing something similar to that. It's basically Social Security for kids. Do we care about our kids? Yay or nay? And our kids are our future. Yay or nay? The answer, of course, is yes. And are the conditions that the kid is growing up in, will that etch itself and affect that kid positively or negatively? And yes, the answer is, of course, yes. It's like, so I find that to be a positive thing. But, it's a rare thing, though. Like, and I agree with you. The theatrics of what takes place, like this kind of overarching stuff, I don't know, it's aggravating. There's reality to our world that these guys just seem to play in without necessarily seem to affect in a deliberate, positive, rational way. And it's aggravating. But let's move to the Microsoft hack story, because I want to get to this. The United States has basically accused China of a ransomware attack. So this is Associated Press. The Biden administration and Western allies formally blamed China on Monday for a massive hack of the Microsoft Exchange email server and asserted that criminal hackers associated with the Chinese government have carried out ransomware and other illicit cyber operations. I find this to be astonishing. And so right here, unlike in April when public finger pointing of Russia hacking was paired with a raft of sanctions against Moscow, the Biden administration did not announce any action against Beijing. Nonetheless, a senior administration official who briefed reporters said that the United States has confronted senior Chinese officials and that the White House regards the multinational shaming as sending an important message, even if no single action can change behavior. They don't know anything. They're basically accusing China of a ransomware hack. And the wild part about this is when you're looking across from the other story with Pegasus and NSO Group, the Israeli government had to approve all of that stuff, meaning they're not making this association with the Israeli government in the way that they're making this association with the Chinese government, that all of these guys in this kind of mean girls thing have basically said China is responsible for. Astonishing. What is your take on this?
Here's the problem. For the Biden administration to make this public hoopla, all it is grandstanding against China, because at the end of the day, if you truly believe that's what is happening, then why are there no repercussions? Why are there, like you just mentioned a moment ago about the sanctions against Russia, which, by the way, again, when it comes to Russia, there is a deliberate conflation between bad actors who happen to be either Russian-speaking or Russian nationals, literally wherever they might be in the world. If if their grandfather was from Moscow and they're a hacker somewhere, well, they deliberately conflict with the Russian state. So that's point number one that I find really annoying when the media gets a hold of any of these stories. And when it comes to China, I find it to be grandstanding from the Biden administration, because if there's no punitive action taken, then A, do you actually believe that the Chinese state is behind this?
Right. It's the government working to do X and Y. And that's where I think it comes to the story for the Israel company, the Pegasus. I mean, that spyware. Because this was a situation where it seemed that there was some coordination, if not, tacit, with the government in regards to the way the application was being dismissed. But this is not that, if that makes sense. Meaning, when we're talking about the Chinese case, it seems like we're talking about ransomware that had taken place in the government. And we don't even hold ourselves accountable for that. When most of these cyber attacks come out of the United States, we don't say the U.S. government had all of these ransomware attacks that were associated with the government. This is somewhat of a special case that we use when we're accusing China or Russia of this stuff. I just thought it was amazing. And it's a ransomware attack. It's not a governmental thing.
Absolutely. The thing is, the relationship with the U.S. and Russia, obviously, ever since the Cold War, it doesn't matter that we claim it was over. It's like that toxic friendship that you have. You know, everybody has that one friend where your relationship is based on bashing each other and talking smack to each other's faces, but you kind of really actually get along. I kind of feel like that's what the relationship has always been with the U.S. and Russia.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to China, the rise of China, literally, just in my lifetime, going from a developing BRICS nation, and I don't know why they still call it a part of the BRICS nation now, but being the second biggest economy in the world in my lifetime, going from that to this.
Well, I think that's where a lot of the criticism comes in. This kind of maximum pressure campaign where everything is on the table in regards to pushing back. There was a speech that Biden gave recently where he was talking about capitalism is now doing great. And it's like, if that was true, you would not be standing here telling me that. Meaning, like, if that was true, and if you really believe that the competition and everything else, I mean, Biden is the one who set up the framing of this is a competition against autarky, competition against China, and we have to do all of these things in order to fight back and push back against it. He's the one who's setting those terms. It's like, if that was true, you wouldn't have to do all of that. And in this case, the maximum pressure campaign, whether it's genocide, whether it's, oh my God, they're hacking the world, oh my God, they're stealing our jobs, oh my God, they're doing X or Y. It's all of that built into this notion of existential competition with China. Horses out the barn and we're terrified.
I don't know that it's maximum pressure, though, because like Manila was saying, if we took this seriously, we'd be applying sanctions. It's like this weird kind of constant pressure.
Yeah.
And I can't tell if it's that the establishment hasn't decided what it wants to do, and there are competing parties.
That's pretty extreme.
Of course it is. And
That's
Trump,
pretty.
Yeah, and Trump did first. Anthony Blinken signed on to that. There's a continuity in the administration, which is interesting. That if no other ground officially, they're willing to follow on with what Trump did without any real reservations. No, but my point is, I think, Manila, you were onto something there. If it's not maximum pressure for a second, I don't want to immediately undercut you, Jamarl, but take for a second, it's something slightly different. It's constant pressure. What is it going for? Manila, what are we trying to do to China? What are we trying to do with this campaign?
If I had the answer, I would probably be Secretary of State. Goodbye, Tony Blinken.
I would prefer you to him.
I literally cannot understand the campaign against China right now, other than to keep them in the number 2 spot economically. Because, I mean, I know, obviously, I think we can all agree that the main drivers for any state is financial first, right? And so I think the only reason there's this kind of grandstanding against China right now is just it's a PR move. It's to position them to be bad actors so they cannot overtake us in the 21st century to become the number 1 economy in the world. I mean, that's the only thing that would make any remote sense, but whoever said government had to make any sense.
And I guess that makes sense to me, and that is a certainty for me. But it also doesn't explain for me why we're not doing the maximum that we can. I mean, we still have, and maybe I'm trying to fill it in for myself. We have a continuing economic relationship with them. Yeah. We buy goods from them. We're trying to maintain at least nominally some sense that everything's okay around the world, and that Biden's restoring normality not just to America but to our globe. So if we were to go full on with them, we wouldn't. They'd likely respond proportionately.
It would injure us.
They'd cut things down.
Right.
Exactly.
It's like you can't be absurd with the maximum pressure.
You can't be absurd, exactly.
Yeah.
And at the same time, another argument to be made here is if they were to apply sanctions based on the allegation that China is responsible for the Microsoft Exchange breach, they might have to provide evidence for it, which they lack.
Right.
And that might beg questions about the whole Russia cyber breach narrative over the last couple of years. Manila, we got to close. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you, just in a couple of seconds, how should we try to relate to China as America? Manila.
Oh, God, I don't have the answer to that.
I'm sorry.
Answer for the next 30 seconds. But I just feel that, like you said, it's a continuation of the Trump campaign against China. It's to position them, to keep them in the number 2 spot, to try to, until we figure out our plan to actually remain number 1 legitimately. Now we're the number 1 exporter of war, and maybe we need to change that in order to retain our number 1 spot.
Agreed 1,000%. Manila Chan, thank you for joining us. Manila Chan, RT host of RT America's daily news program In Question. Follow her on Twitter at Manila Chan, on Facebook at Manila Chan Reports, and watch In Question on RT America. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of today's show.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across the 4 quarters of these disunited states and the increasingly divided hemispheres of our globe. I'm trying to make it make sense there. Anyway, in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man clinging to the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back, and again, it is July 21st, 2021. In case you're a time traveler, I just helped to orientate you. It is also 9:01 a.m. Eastern, and without further ado, let's get into the headlines in COVID news. First up, there were about 62,012 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 300 new deaths too. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 37,975 cases per day. That's an increase of almost 200%, almost 3 times from the average 2 weeks earlier, 195% specifically. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 56% of residents have received at least 1 dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,159,723 people across the United States. It's also killed 608,717 of us in this country. A hospital in Texas has reported its first case of the Lambda variant as the state tries to curtail the progress of the Delta strain. Lambda was first detected in Peru. WHO officials stated that this strain is a quote-unquote variant of interest and that their primary focus was still on Delta, as it has a much higher viral load. In national political news, drug-related deaths in the United States have risen 29% in 2020 from 2019. About 3/4 of these deaths are attributed to opioids, and 83% of those are the increasingly popular synthetic opioids. The biggest perpetrator is fentanyl, which is more dangerous, more potent, and more common than heroin. Largely attributed to the pandemic, drug use in America has gone up dramatically, sending the drug-related death count to over 93,000 in 2020 compared to 70,000 the year prior. A California couple is being charged with involuntary manslaughter after their gender reveal party started a massive fire in California last year. I remember that fire. I saw the smoke from that fire. I was in SoCal at the time. 13 people were injured, 5 homes and 15 buildings were destroyed, and firefighter Charles Morton lost his life. The couple also faces 29 counts, spanning over 3 different charges relating to the illegal use of fire. Gender reveal parties have been responsible for a fatal plane crash, partygoers' deaths, multiple wild and brush fires, and involuntary pipe bombs. On September 12th of last year, a right-wing extremist group attempted a kidnapping plot of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Whitmer's crime? Imposing COVID restrictions in the state. The group was joined by 1 undercover agent and 1 informant, both working for the FBI. The men claimed they were targeted for their political beliefs and that the FBI illegally engaged in entrapment. They state the government agency is responsible for masterminding the plot, encouraging anti-government sentiment and military-style training. Many are looking at this as a win for law enforcement in their efforts to stop domestic terrorism. Others are touting this as outrageous government overreach that incites radicalization because law enforcement is shamelessly infiltrating anti-government groups. And, that's the whole thing with entrapment, is you're urging them on. Yeah, commit this crime, and then we'll come in and catch you.
Yeah.
That's the thing there.
Yeah.
In international news, the Austrian government is reporting on local cases of Havana syndrome among the diplomats in the U.S. embassy. And this is in Austria, not Cuba, for which the capital of Cuba, Havana syndrome, was named after, of course. It was in 2016 that American and Canadian diplomats first reported symptoms of the mysterious illness. Havana syndrome involves hearing strange noises, like a strange grating sound, headaches, hearing loss, memory loss, and nausea. The illnesses were blamed on suspected microwave attacks by the Cubans, which would, however, fail to explain why diplomats are now suffering from these symptoms in Austria.
But think about what we're saying, microwave attacks.
Microwave attacks.
How?
I don't know. It sounds kind of conspiratorial.
What device?
Doesn't that sound like Daily News and Mail, National Enquirer?
It sounds like a satellite beaming
50
something
years
into
ago.
somebody's head that's screwing with it.
Shouldn't I be making fun of this?
Initially, I thought they said the Russians were doing it. That's what I heard at one point.
Yeah.
Now they're saying the Cubans were doing it.
In Austria?
But I think it's what's profound about it is like, well, okay, what is the mechanics of that? Who is doing it? What technology are they using to do it? What are you doing? Zeroing in on somebody's head with a device? Like, what are the mechanics of that? I want to know the mechanics. That's what I was fascinated by.
I want to know how they do
it's
it.
So sci-fi.
Let me come by so I can take notes.
Yeah, I want to take notes. I want to know how they do it.
Yeah.
Mechanics. What device? Is it a microwave gun that is not scrambling the person's head, is not boiling their head like in a microwave, but just enough to screw with them?
It's a weird enough story that there's probably a there, and I too am very curious about what that there is. But
I don't know. I mean, I've seen them, they've been reporting it on local news, and I've been like, okay, what are the mechanics? Go into the mechanics. I want somebody to explain how they think this is taking place.
Yeah.
That's the part that I want, and I haven't heard that part.
Austin, the producer, sent a GIF or a GIF, however you like to pronounce it. And he's like, "This is the microwave attacks," and it's just a lady throwing a microwave at the ground, which I was like, "That's dorky, Austin," but I chuckled at it too. No, I don't know how it works. We'll come back on it maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, and certainly with guests soon. 3 research institutions in Italy released a report several weeks ago in which they pushed back on the narrative that China is guilty of genocide in its treatment of Uyghurs. The Italian Institute of Politics, Society and Economics, the Italian Institute of International Diplomacy, and the Italian Eurasian Mediterranean Research Center co-wrote the report together. In tech news, Biden is set to nominate Jonathan Cantor to lead the Justice Department's antitrust division. Cantor is an antitrust lawyer, and he is expected to improve upon Biden's surprisingly trust-busting oriented selections in key positions so far. Specifically, last month, Biden named Nina Khan to lead the Federal Trade Commission, and earlier this year, Biden named Tim Wu to the National Economic Council. Each of those people has spoken out against the continued consolidation of power in the tech industry. The phones of French President Emmanuel Macron and over a dozen of his government staff may have been targeted by the Moroccan government. The phone numbers for these 16 officials were found among the 50,000 phone numbers included in this list released to disclose the efforts activities of NSO Group, which has this Pegasus malware service that they were selling to dozens of governments, and I mean governments around the world, who were using that service, apparently and allegedly, to spy on their own citizens, specifically journalists. So targeting domestic critics, basically, which sounds pretty authoritarian, and a couple of different angles. We had extensive conversation about this yesterday. One is the cyber mercenary angle and how weird it is that all these countries are having to, they don't have their own intelligence community. They lack an NSA. They don't have a CIA. So what do? They bring in these outside mercenaries, like Swiss pikemen in the 1400s or something. They bring in these elites who've been trained in how to do this thing, and then they rely on them. And apparently, some world leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron, were targeted, or at least are in the network associated with this list. A lot of raised eyebrows and a lot of questions, and I hope this doesn't fade away within the next couple of days because it has to do with an Israeli company, and we have a special relationship with Israel.
So much so, our numbers are blessedly not targeted.
Yes, the international code, the phone code.
I'm not on that list, Shane. You're not on that list, Shane.
It's true. It's true. The +1 that you're supposed to dial before you call an international, U.S. number specifically. Today is the second day of Russia's MAKS, M-A-K-S, air show. Some highlights include a maneuver display by Indian Air Force's Sarang helicopters and the unveiling of the new Checkmate fighter jet from Russia. The 5th-generation light fighter is predicted to directly compete with the U.S. F-35 stealth fighter. This also comes following the release of footage on the S-500 missile system. We're going to be getting into a conversation with Mark Sloboda coming on in just a few minutes He's a geopolitical analyst, and we're going to be talking about this generation of military armaments, military equipment, military capacity in Europe, Eurasia, Russia, this whole region, and this escalatory race over supersonic weaponry, what this forebodes, what it might lead to. We're going to be getting into that in just a couple minutes with Mark. In Earth and Science news, Chinese state media says the flooded city of Chengdu received more rain yesterday than it normally does in a year. 16 people died. More deaths, sadly, are still being counted. Wildfires on the West Coast are raging on. The Oregon bootleg fire has grown to 606 square miles. That's half the size of the state of Rhode Island. Massive smoke columns were sent 6 miles up in the air before being carried by wind. The smoke is now causing hazy skies as far east as New York. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And there we go. We're back. Those were our headlines. And again, talking with Mark Sloboda in just a couple of minutes. I want to give people a very quick rundown of the show today. We've had 3 guests on so far. We'll be talking with Mark in just a few. At 7:30 a.m. Eastern, we spoke with Dr. Mikhail Kogan. Great conversation with him. At 8:15 a.m. Eastern, we spoke with Joel Siegel about the infrastructure bill. By the way, with Mikhail Kogan, we were talking about COVID vaccines. Longer conversation. At 8:30, we just finished up a conversation with Manila Chan, ended at 9 a.m. And again, we're about to get into a conversation with Mark Sloboda in a few minutes here. And that's that.
Yeah.
Jamarl, I saw you had a bunch of clips, or at least a couple of clips.
Well, there's a fight between Fauci and Rand Paul.
You want to do this?
Let's play this clip, because I think this clip is really interesting. So, Rand Paul and Fauci have had their blow-ups on more than one occasion. And on this one, Fauci is not taking anything off of Rand Paul and is basically just saying, you don't know what you're talking about. By the same token, is that entirely true as a flat fact, perfect truth? And I don't think it necessarily is. Let's play this clip. Even though Fauci is right here, I don't necessarily think Rand Paul is entirely wrong. Let's play the clip.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you were referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. You get one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's Dr. Fauci.
I have to, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well,
we don't
wait
know
a minute.
If it did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is
molecularly.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
you can't
not.
Get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
Time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible
No one's
to
saying
result
they are. No
in
one's saying those viruses
SARS-CoV-2.
caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were
They're not.
animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And you
admit the truth.
And you
Senator
implying...
Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
All right, let's stop there. He is implying it on some level, even though he's being squeamish.
Totally, but
it
is he
does
wrong?
sound like it is gain of function.
That sounds
That's what
100%
it
like gain
sounds
of function. If you look up, okay, I don't mean to take Wikipedia as the record of truth, but take it as like the public encyclopedia that we all use or whatever. Gain of function research is medical research that alters an organism or disease in a way that increases pathogenesis, transmissibility, or host range.
Right. See, I don't know what Fauci is using as some kind of technical fig leaf, but it sounds like gain of function.
exactly like gain
I
of
think
function
his
research.
issue is don't pin that as if this has anything to do with COVID. I think that's Fauci's point. The problem is that on some level, Rand Paul might be right. That, not that it's connected to COVID,
it might
but that
be, though.
in and of itself, gain of function.
It might be, and that is the concern. And that's when I get it. That's speculation.
Yeah,
but
I don't see like it's
the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists when they released that report that you cited a couple of months ago. The idea that there might have been a leak from the lab.
Oh, potentially. Yes.
Potentially. Okay, let's take that as not just as xenophobic anti-China propaganda.
We don't know.
It's a possibility. It's a possibility. Put it as a hypothesis. But the idea that the NIH funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology, as far as I know, they did.
Right there. That's the part that's
they
true.
did. And then Fauci has lied about that. And
Well, see, I
that's
don't know if he's-
that's what Paul's hitting him on.
I don't know if he's lying about it.
He said
I
in
don't know
May.
if Fauci, because there are other clips where these two went back and forth. I don't remember Fauci lying about supporting or there being some kind of grant to the NIH. I think Fauci's issue is you're trying to tie us to this in a way that I don't want to be tied to it. Meaning, yes, they might have funded some kind of research there. That might be true. And yes, they might have been doing some kind of gain of research on something else that has no way or any way associated with
that's
thing.
a bad way to handle it for him.
Yeah.
That's a
It
terrible
just
way
looks
to handle
bad.
it for him.
I mean, but he doesn't want to say, well, yeah, we were doing research in this because that research is necessary for us to understand the way the pathogens, blah, blah, blah. That's too many words. And Rand Paul would use that as a politician to basically make it look like they were doing something else. He's stuck in this kind of thing of like, no, I'm not going to give any ground on this because I'm not going to allow you to shape this or whatever else. But fact is, they might have researched or given funding to NIH. There may be a finite number of these places around the world, and so they may be doing research with these in coordination with them. It would be a waste of a lab if you weren't on some level.
I hear you, and I think I can make arguments for gain of function research, but it's like it's the kind of immature and unwise lie that like a 6-year-old would tell. You're running down the hallway. You're not supposed to eat the cookies, and you don't. You're just running down the hallway and you knock the cookie jar off. And when the cookie jar falls off, it breaks. You might have a couple of cookies, but you really didn't mean to. And then when your parent asks you, did you like eat the cookies? Did you break the jar? No, I didn't have anything to do with it. You don't understand. It's a misplaced metaphor. But my point is, he's trying to cover up any connection with the thing because he doesn't want the implication, which might be true or might be false, that his institution funded research that led to the deaths of millions of people.
See, right there. That's where I think you lose me. Because I think there's no meaning. And I think that's the problem. And that's where Fauci is trying to avoid that characterization because we have no idea.
Yeah, but in the process,
we have nothing to go on.
Lie about
that
it,
characterization
but don't lie about it. Don't lie about it.
But what did he lie about?
The gain of function research.
But see, but
what
that's
exactly
just it. I don't know.
it?
I need Fauci to give a technical explanation of, well, what do you mean by that? I would give him the benefit of the doubt, right? Especially since I think Rand Paul is trying to come up with something that I think is false. I want him to explain because what it sounds like to me is that they were doing gain of function research, that Fauci doesn't want to own up to the fact that that lab might have been doing that. Or maybe it's like, well, look, whatever that lab was doing, we weren't funding stuff that was in gain of function.
There's a pretty good analysis too. If you look back, you remember the Fauci email leaks?
Yeah.
Right the night when the stuff was breaking.
Yes.
Remember, you might have read through this.
Yes.
He got sent private testimony, and it's not just anonymous people sending him droves of emails, giving him tips.
Yeah.
It's not just that. Somebody he trusted sent him an email saying they think it might have something to do with the Wuhan, Institute of Virology. There might be a connection there in some way. He acted on that immediately. I forget the specifics. It was a couple of weeks ago that I was looking at it, so I'm forgetting names and times and things like that. But basically, he gets this tip. He immediately gets into action, calls for a meeting that we don't know the contents of.
Yeah.
Some of the people on that meeting became some of the leading experts on this stuff. So whatever happened in that meeting was influential, is my point.
Yeah.
when it comes to his internal bureaucracy, he's treating this like a serious possibility. When it comes to talking to people outside, he's downplaying
I think you would have to. I mean, if you think about it.
Yeah, but it's not wise.
But see, no, I don't know if he's downplaying. Yeah, see, I don't take it that way. I take it as he is in an overt political situation with somebody basically is trying to set a narrative of events.
He's trying to protect himself, but the way you do that is by getting it out ahead with the truth. Because if you're lying, and if you're going to get caught lying, then you want
to... Well, that's the catch. What do you think he's lying about?
I think that he's lying about whether or not the NIH was involved in funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology, whether Fauci knew about that, and what gain-of-function research is, frankly.
Okay, so the NIH thing, yes, he would have to know about that. No, I don't necessarily think he's lied about that. Whether or not they were funding gain of research, that's different. That's the part that I don't know. And look, if that's either yes or no, right? I mean, what was the money that was being given to that lab to study whatever? Okay, what was it? What was it doing? What was the function of it? And on some level, does it even matter? I mean, yes, I am not upset that our government may be paying some of the lab to study gain of function in regards to learning about bacteria. That doesn't upset me. That doesn't even shock me per se. But it's a whole different, this is a political spot, right? And in this case, whether or not the lab had a leak, I have no idea. I'm in the camp of a question mark in regards to the thing. Initially, I thought it was, okay, these guys are just filing another way to bash China. But initially, after that, I was like, yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, I saw that happening, but I also saw some people before this ever broke who don't have any real problem with China. It's not their beat.
Talking
about the possibility
there's a problem with that lab.
Yeah. I remember people talking, early last year. I remember myself talking about it, the Mojang miners incident, where there was the closest known genetic, in terms of genetic composition, the virus closest to COVID-19 discovered in this mine, and there were these bats that were carrying it. And just that, okay, it's the closest known virus, like worth looking into, even if you're just trying to understand the symptomatology.
Yes,
is my point. And the fact that
it's not a shocking thing.
The idea that they would study that. Okay, there's this virulent virus.
Yeah,
it's going to get people sick, potentially kill them. We want to study this so we can prevent that from turning into a pandemic.
Yes,
I get that idea. Just don't lie about it. If you got your hand dirty, you try to get out ahead of it, so that you can, restore whatever trust you've lost.
I mean, the catch becomes though, it's possible that they didn't have anything to do with that. Meaning, yes, we were giving money to them for X, but you guys are trying to accuse us of Y.
If that's the case, say that. Make that your case. Make that your case. Because the longer you spend not talking about it, and the longer people are like, wait, is he lying? Is he lying about gain-of-function research? The worse you're going to do.
I need to hear the technical explanation of what he's trying to explain in regards to, because I would love for functional media, who's not just lavishing attention on Fauci, to be like, hey, when you were in that conversation with Rainbow, would you like to explain what you meant? Because this sounds like gain-of-function research.
It does sound kind of like
I would ask.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most pertinent question in the world. Give me the chance to explain.
Totally.
But look, we've gone over. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back with Mark Sloboda. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're joined by Mark Sloboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. Follow him on Twitter at MarkSloboda1. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. Mark, we're going to be talking about military equipment here. This is the kind of thing that I think attracts a lot of people's interest in a general sense. Ooh, rocketry. Ooh, ballistics. Explosions. Specifically, you can think, the more masculine-minded or whatever, are going to get particularly caught up. Explosions, simply. Nevertheless, I don't actually know all that much about it. Let's get into it. I want to start out with the latest news, but if we could also get a general overview a little bit down the line of like what are the capacities of the current generation of military hardware? What's the recent history? What's the near future? That kind of thing. Just giving you heads up. We're probably going to be getting into that too. But first of all, the second day of this big air show, the MAKS, the MAX air show in Russia, They're debuting a new fighter jet, and this follows the footage released just in the last couple of days of the F-500 missile defense system. What are the capacities of these new tools? How do you think Russia's using them? And I don't just mean for their own purposes, but also, of course, selling them, leasing them out to other nations, that kind of thing. How do you think the U.S. is going to receive this? Mark.
Okay, Shane, Jamarl, thanks for having me on. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines. During this week's Max show, Russia is unveiling a new lightweight stealth fighter to complement its already heavyweight Su-57. This is going to be it's known by the marketing name as the Checkmate. And it is meant to be a lightweight 5th-gen stealth aircraft that is supposed to be able to compete with and on many measures surpass the U.S.'s F-35. And so far, what we've been shown looks pretty impressive. It is boasting a longer range, a less radar signature, being able to carry more ordnance, and far more affordable than the F-35. That is one of the big things about this aircraft. That it is a lot of it is going to be directed towards an export model. And it is going to be some $25 to $30 million a piece, which sounds like a lot, but it is actually from half to a third of equivalent 5th-gen fighters from the U.S., France, and other Western countries that have them. So what we've been shown is pretty impressive. The Max is also going to be showcasing a new Russian attack drone, the Orion E, also with the announcement that Russia is going to start they're developing a factory for mass production to enter the international attack drone market in a big way, to try to seize a chunk of that market for themselves with some of the technology. But we've also seen a lot of announcements in recent days with Russian military technology. They just test fired the hypersonic anti-ship cruise missile, the Zircon, successfully. Yeah, that was just tested in the Arctic in the last week. Some range of greater than 200 miles at a speed of Mach 7. So that's pretty impressive. The S-500 is the latest iteration of Russia's anti-aircraft systems. And the S-400 was probably already the most advanced air defense, missile defense system in the world. And the S-500 is basically a more specialized version of that will be kind of more capable of missile defense. It should also be capable of space defense, the first system in the world capable of that, capable of hitting targets in near Earth orbit. So that's pretty impressive, and that is something that is well past development in production. It's actually being rolled out into the field now. We've also seen tests with the Sarmat and the Iskander intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Russian premier tank of the Armada is entering serial production. Russia has showcased a new underwater nuclear-capable swarm drone, the Poseidon attack drone, ground attack drone, basically like a little mini remote control tank thing called the Uran 9. And while Russia's Navy continues to lag behind, not a blue water status on the surface fleet, not having high budget items like aircraft carriers anymore to compete with the U.S. in power projection, their submarines continue to be among the most impressive. And just in this year, they've launched the Severodonetsk, their new gen of nuclear submarine, and that is a pretty impressive piece. beast.
I think the thing is, oftentimes when people or when countries get into war, they have an expectation of what that war is going to look like, and it changes. It's never that. And so the power projection model might not necessarily be the model going forward with drones and so forth. Meaning, do you really need a fighter pilot and a fighter jet if you can come up with an AI that can basically do the job? Or, with one guy controlling it or something to that effect, meaning it changes. Our world is changing. I sat here listening and thought to myself, this is a darker world. And it's not the weapons that Russia just have by themselves. I mean, we're talking about technology where you would have a drone make a choice on whether or not to kill a person without another person being attached to that choice. Like you're talking about swarm drones in water, like submarines, and these things are working in coordination with one another as they go about where a person is somewhere else. Like this is a far, far different world that we're talking about in regards to warfare. Mark, please.
Yeah, Putin just this week said that the future of aviation is artificial intelligence and robotics. And previously in 2017, he has quoted as, the country that leads in military AI within, the next decade or two is going to be the leader of the world.
I mean,
so he's very big on pushing that. And at the same time, he has voiced a very cautionary tone on that, saying that, countries are being forced to compete right now in a new arms race. But what we really need to do is to sit down with AI and underwater drones and hypersonic missiles and come up with a whole new arms control global security architecture.
Work out an agreement on this to keep those things in bounds. Because AI specifically,
there are no rules.
Yeah, it's not just the Terminator. Well, okay, but on that, these new releases, I don't know enough to know which way this one falls. But are these mere responses to the previous generation? Are these responses to the F-35 and to their, the United States aircraft carriers, to their offensive capabilities? Are these symmetrically responding defensively to those same things? Or do you see in this generation some of the next-gen stuff? In other words, is Russia, with what they're debuting at this Max Air show, are they responding to the past? Are they responding to the future? Some balance? Where does it fall? Mark?
Okay, yeah, so when we're talking the aviation, Russia is definitely following the U.S., and that is a response to that, right? The Su-57, this new Checkmate, the attack drones, that is a kind of a defensive response, developing something lagging behind the U.S. there. When we're talking hypersonic missiles, such as the Zircon, the Kinjal, the Dagger, Russia is the front runner. Right? There are several countries competing, producing hypersonic missiles at this point. Russia appears to be the leader there. They've pushed that big. They see that is their response to the U.S. pulling out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2001. They warned about this. And this is their attempt to counter that, and they were quite clear about that. We've been forced to this. Hypersonic missiles were actually outlawed by that treaty. The U.S. pulling out of that treaty and putting missile defense in Europe and in Japan and other places. They say puts their nuclear deterrent at risk. Would potentially eventually allow the U.S. for a devastating first strike capability, which cannot be allowed.
They were looking for strategic balance. Yeah, strategic balance.
With air defense, like the S-400, the S-500, and with electronic warfare, those are two other areas where Russia is out in front of the U.S. But both of those are, again, primarily defensive systems. Not that anything is really defensive in a war, but in the way that we often think about them, those are systems designed to counter U.S. air superiority.
The logic of this stuff just seems so maddening if you're just sitting outside of the world. I mean, we can come to some agreement at one point of saying, hey, we need to have treaties to prevent missiles from going into space. Okay, great. And that means on some level that two countries can come together and say, we don't want to spend money and resources trying to see who can basically outcompete one another in space. Fair enough. But then when you get to the ground, for whatever reason, that same logic doesn't entirely apply. Meaning, if you can do that in space, why doesn't the logic apply when you're talking about just being on the ground saying, okay, well, hey, let's not waste money investing in X and Y where our countries can do. It's just a maddening thing. I just hear this and I think to myself,
I don't
this
even
is
think
so
it
dark.
really applies to space anymore.
No, not now. Not at this point. I mean, that's why the like you said, strategic balance. They needed the ability to knock out satellites if necessary. Satellites at this point allow people to, pick military targets and whatnot. One of the thing that you brought up, though, about the missiles being in the various locations. Well, this is Newsweek. Moscow has warned the Pentagon that the U.S. deploying hypersonic missiles in Europe could unintentionally spark hostilities. Now, this takes place hours after Russia test fired the missile from the warship. Now, the question, I guess, that Shane was getting at is, are these things separate from one another? Or all these things are some level related? Meaning you guys are putting various weapon systems, hypersonic missiles, in these various locations in Europe. This is going to cut down the reaction time between us and you because these things travel so fast that if any of these things leave, we would have to take it as a first strike. We have it's too close. And so are these things related to one another? The fact that they're putting on this show and they're releasing the weapons and everything else while simultaneously giving the Pentagon this warning about putting these systems in Europe.
Yes, absolutely. And reaction time is a big concern. This is one of the ways that we've really entered in a much more dangerous world than the Cold War, with the U.S. pulling out of the short and medium range international with the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Treaty, and with the U.S. threatening to put those weapons back in Europe if Europe would allow it. That's a big threat because that means the U.S. can launch missiles at Russia potentially before Russia can fully align their defensive and a responsive fire. Then it becomes necessary for Russia to deploy hypersonic missiles near Europe, right? Russia's a big country, of course, but a big, question always is where does Russia deploy these weapons within the country, right? They were testing the Zircon in the Arctic, right? But if they deploy them on the European border to counter U.S. missiles, well, then the U.S. will be, compelled to develop hypersonic short and intermediate range weapons and also deploy them in Europe. And you see that we're already
it's a tit for tat. It's an escalation. Yeah.
We are now progressing beyond a quantitative or qualitative arms race, which we have been in since 2001 when the U.S. pulled out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. We are now beginning phase of quantitative arms race as well, which is even scarier.
The MAX air show in general, can you explain this air show, what this is, what role it plays in not just Russian culture, but like the Commonwealth of States associated with the remnants of the Soviet Union? It seems like I'm reading that this is a principal event, and I don't think we have our version of this in America, but maybe I'm wrong. Can you explain this event for folks, Mark?
Yeah, there are big air shows in the United States that are very much a cultural and entertainment and patriotic thing,
including
Russia.
Debuting a lot of new craft like we're talking about here.
Yes, including debuting a lot of new craft. And one, again, is kind of a patriotism / entertainment venue. But, what the producers, what the military complex in both countries are actually thinking of is of export, of showing what they can make to prospective clients around the world in Africa, the Middle East, in particular, with all the money there, and Asia, and so on. And actually, it's not just the U.S. and Russia, by the way. The United Kingdom does the same thing. So does France, and so on. This is kind of a well-established global phenomenon between big military, particularly air producers around the world.
The missile that can travel at Mach 9 is astonishing. And this is not going to be technology that just Russia develops. It's going to be, the U.S. is going to develop this tech. And like you made the point of saying, this already developed. And so this is going to be stuff that's going to be sold to other countries. This is a dark world, Mark. I mean, because I would imagine upkeep. What is the time frame, by the way, on those aircraft and on the missile systems and whatnot when they sell those to the various countries? Do you know?
What is the time frame?
Yeah, the time frame between processing, meaning between a purchase and between a purchase being delivered?
Well, that can be years. At a normal spell. Russia is showcasing, for instance, the checkmate now in 2021, and they're talking about it going into serial production in 2026.
Oh.
Right? So that's
half a decade
a
down the
5-year
line.
jump.
Yeah.
Yes.
And wait, Jamarl,
that's the way they think.
Were you like planning on buying some of these?
No, I'm just curious. Like if Saudi Arabia basically said, okay, look, we have a ton of money. We want to buy a checkmate and we want to buy several hypersonic missiles.
Yeah.
All right. What happens in the Middle East in regards to a response to that?
Yeah. How long does that take?
Yeah. How long does that take? And how long do the other governments have to conform to the fact that they're like, it's just, when I say it's a darker world, I really mean it's a darker world. I get a horrible pit in my stomach when I hear this stuff.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, okay. First of all, Saudi Arabia probably wouldn't buy them because then they would be subject to U.S. sanctions, and they've kind of hinted as much.
I'm just giving an example.
Saudi Arabia
Okay, let's say
expressing
Erdogan.
interest in the S-400.
Okay, let's say Erdogan
Like
or
with the
Modi
S-400.
yeah.
Like with the S-400 with Erdogan specifically. Yeah. Anyway. Mark, how does this compare? Say there's a global confrontation like a world war. How would the current generation of military technology compare to what we saw in World War II? In other words, if you are a random person watching the outbreak of this stuff, or if you're a military commander, I don't care. What does this look like compared to what we saw, our parents saw, our grandparents saw 80 years ago, World War II? Mark.
Well, of course, it's much less in your face, right? Combat is more ranged already and is rapidly progressing in that direction. Putin, while speaking on AI and robotics at the air show this week, was talking about how very soon wars will be fought primarily between drones, attack drones on either side, and which other side wipes out the other's drones, the other side will be forced to surrender. Maybe. Right. And again, even, of course, more dangerous when those drones are then autonomous and decisions are made by AI.
Well, and briefly, in the first case, it would be bloodless. Ideally, you just have the drones fighting and then nobody, just the one side surrenders, or it gets extremely bloody when you have UAVs going out and just willy-nilly killing people.
Yeah, that's a possibility, but that's a possible warfare future.
Well,
but right
logical.
now we're in the extremely messy in-between phase where
I think it's logical. I think because we have this thing of we want to lessen harm, meaning I want to lessen our pilots getting killed, or I want to lessen our troops getting killed. So what do? You have autonomous vehicles that go out and fight those wars. And then, okay, what happens when one side's autonomous vehicles? Well, at that point, you would imagine pilots get back into the thing in order to fight the autonomous. Like, it's that stuff. That stuff gets very weird. I mean, it's dramatically different.
But at the same time, your military thinkers are thinking, well, we need to hit not just their drones, but their ability to deploy, operate, and produce those drones, right? So that gets, military thinkers are always thinking several steps ahead, right? They're never thinking on the moment now. They're thinking of warfare 10, 15, 20 years down the road. With all of the new technology between the hypersonic missiles, the new intercontinental ballistic missiles being deployed, the hypersonic glide vehicles like Russia's Avangard, war is looking far more total than ever before when it's considered far more destructive. And again, there is no rules of the road like there was during the Cold War. We've got one last piece of Cold War security architecture, which is the New START Treaty, but that's already far outdated. That's not covering any of this new technology. It's not covering hypersonics. It's not covering underwater drones. It's not covering AI and autonomous kill vehicles. And Russia has, voiced this alarm again and again. We really should sit down and talk about these things and make some concessions and rules of the road and limitations, because right now things are going all out of control in a whole lot of directions. And it's not just bipolar anymore. this is a great power game now, where it's not just the U.S. and the Soviet Union competing. It's the U.S. and Russia and China and Europe and India, and now we've got new players like Turkey,
that makes it more
which
unpredictable,
you wouldn't believe it,
right?
Is a drone superpower right now.
I'm sorry for interrupting. That makes it more unpredictable. It makes it less predictable. If you have just two just two powers competing with each other, then their leaders, even though they may disagree with their own administrations, they certainly disagree with each other. You have two parties broadly. The more parties you introduce, the more uncertainty, the more voices there are speaking at the table, the more any one of those groups can decide to take a sudden rash move and spill everything over for the rest of us. That's that was the direct implication that I heard. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, and far more than just that, we are very much on the verge of non-state actors getting access to weapons like this.
Yes.
Right? We've already seen in Syria jihadists deploying a lot of drones and drone swarms attacking Russian military bases. Right? Now, of course, it's very much likely that Turkey and the U.S. are helping Al-Qaeda out there, but the idea is that these weapons are already beginning to enter into the hands of non-state actors,
Getting
whether
closer
that
and
is
closer to
for
the
their own
civilian base.
uses or proxy uses.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it might start with the proxies, but it starts to leak out in the same way that I hear that AK-47s are rampant across much of the Middle East because of the legacy of the whole Afghani war, and it kind of percolates through society, that specific type of armament. Anyway, Mark, great conversation. We've only got a minute left with you. This reminds me of the NSO group and the Pegasus thing because, and I'll tie it in here, you have a cyber mercenarial group there basically doing crimes for pay at the bidding of governments around the world, and then shadowy connections to the Israeli government, but we will assume that there are some connections there. Just putting that on the table.
Yeah, absolutely some connections there. But cyber warfare is probably the go-to warfare of everyone right now because of its difficulty to attribute and blame. And the U.S., of course, is the leader in that cyber warfare, however much they like to play the victim otherwise. But other countries are not so far behind.
Mark, you made a comment that I think it should be set on for a bit, the total war comment, this notion that it's not just war for gain. I mean, at one point, there used to be these kind of wars where the goal of the war wasn't to destroy everything. The goal of the war was just to get some kind of political concession from an opponent. And you needed to basically have this contest of wills or contest of strength in order to enforce or your will. Total war was somewhat different in the First or the Second World War, the Second World War, where the goal of it was just total and unabashed destruction. There was, we don't want your surrender, or the surrender has to be unconditional. We don't want any one gain here or one gain there. This is not a negotiation. We want to be able to run the table and at will. And the weapons that these guys are making, I mean, you're talking about like hypersonic missiles on both sides, potentially hypersonic nuclear missiles. And then the question becomes, if this is what we're being shown, what aren't we being shown in regards to what these guys have in the laboratory? So total war. And unfortunately, that leads to the U.S. Military logic of primacy, where we have to not just be able to be better than everyone else in the world. We have to be able to beat everyone else in the world such that no one can present any threat to us whatsoever, and only then can we have real security. And that leads to an endless, forever arms race. The voice.
Because no country can accept being the permanent weaker power.
Correct. And from our standpoint, it's existential. I mean, it's the way we're looking at China. There's not going to be another power rivaling us, all of that stuff. It's just, I don't know, it's just wild politics. And it doesn't seem like there's an endpoint. There's always escalation. It's always a tit for tat. Yes. And if you're giving weapons to basically everyone around the world, and everyone is selling weapons to everyone around the world, there's never a period where people come together in order to bring down the hysteria. It's just constant escalation. It's just wild.
And you thought evolution was a good thing. Military strategic evolution.
The voice that you guys are listening to is Mark Sloboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSloboda1 and find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, 202-521-1320. Tarif from New Orleans, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Free Julian Science, free Daniel, Amnesty International have to recognize Julian Science as a prisoner of conscience. I'm out to say this every day. Flint water crisis still going on. The pipes need to be changed. That bill that Patel in Britain trying to pass is starting to pick up on. Media starting to cover it. Gordon ran an article on it and some other news agencies. The more she pushed that bill, the more people more attention will be brought to Julian Assange and others. That's going to limit the freedom of speech. Dealing with Candace Owens, I have to give her a shout out because she said something about if vaccines are free, which is saving people's lives, why not insulin and breathing treatments? But in that the Haitian guy named Henry,
Ariel Henry.
Ariel Henry. The U.S. has told Haiti to put him as prime minister, and somebody had a write up on him, Madame Bookman, saying that he was connected to the U.S. establishment back in 2000, like John McCain and whatnot. And also, I'm gonna call BAM today on Black. By any means necessary. He had Jermaine Perrion last week and the week before last, just discussing about the geopolitics dealing with Haiti and whatnot. And I'm gonna try to see if they can give y'all the information where y'all can.
Tarif, thank you. They were out in that room. We're like neighbors with them. I'll go and thank you for that. You said I'll look into it, but just say the name again, please, Tarif.
Her name is Jermaine Perry.
Jermaine Perry. Okay. We'll look into that. Tarif, thank you for the heads up. Appreciate it, man.
Anytime. All right.
Appreciate it. And agreed, the Ariel Henry thing with Haiti, I'm trying to look into that. I was a little bit distracted while you're busy. I was like, okay, wait, what's the connection here? He's talking about connections to John McCain, arguably not a good dude in my book, the late John McCain. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what he's talking about there. But we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, 202-521-1320.
Before we close, I wanted to get to this one. Germany to announce deal on Nord Stream 2 pipeline in coming days. Now, I found this to be an astonishing story because when you think about it, the deal that they're talking about is with the United States. But wait a minute, it's a deal between Russia and Germany for their energy production. What does the U.S. have to do with this? But the U.S. is basically engaged in this to try to get some kind of concessions out of Germany because of the deal. And I'm sitting, I was reading this as I was coming, I was like, this is amazing to me that these guys are doing this. But they're basically having to come up to some kind of deal to help out the Ukraine, meaning the United States is making some kind of deal between these guys in order to get some kind of concessions out of Germany for making the deal with Russia. It's their sovereign nation. Or are they?
No, not completely. Okay, two other stories actually. One left over from yesterday, and one that I didn't see until during the show this morning that I want to get to. The one from yesterday. Did you see this thing with the Olympics where the South Korean prime minister decided not to attend?
I saw that
because you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So basically, I believe it's the deputy ambassador to South Korea on behalf of the Japanese government.
Funny. I saw you pick up the document. It was like, all right, how can I say this?
How can I say this? Exactly what it was. He said that that Moon Jae-in, the South Korean leader, was masturbating, which I can say, thank you, FCC, was masturbating if he thought that he was going to be getting a meeting with Yoshihide Suga, the leader of Japan, during the Olympics. This was the deputy ambassador to South Korea. That's like a big diplomatic no-no. And so Japan dropped that guy. Yeah. They replaced him. We'll see what happens with it.
That's such a weird thing to say.
That's one incident. Also relating to Japan, though, and I saw this just during during this morning show. Did you see this video that it is said the Chinese government put out, although they took it down from their channel after it got a couple of million views, threatening nuclear war against Japan?
No.
I want to put a pin in this because I want to verify this, but I'm seeing it being talked about. You know, Fox News leading the way on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of is to be expected, I guess. But basically saying, if Japan sides with Taiwan, they will face a continuous nuclear onslaught from China. And again, there may be something lost in translation. I want to put a pin in it. A little bit of salts.
Well, you know why?
Thrown, but
they got hit with a nuclear bomb.
Exactly. That's a pretty darn personal attack for them.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's rubbing. It's like calling somebody racist almost on some like, it's like you get really mad at somebody and you do some kind of racial slur when the guy drives by. It's personal. It's like, it's very specific to Japan. Yeah, I don't know, man. I would have to see that. And if they were, that sounds like bombacity or bombastic rhetoric, like that would come out of our politicians here. Like Lindsey Graham's like, we need to, go and shoot this guy. And it's like, well, what if the other politicians that says something like that about, you need to shoot Lindsey Graham? Like, we wouldn't tolerate that at all. And we wouldn't even give it the contextual understanding of it. It would be blown up. Yeah, phone call.
We have Karen calling in from Maryland. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Karen, you're on talking about the U.S. Congress. What's on your mind?
I think that you all can do anything about this, but I just wanted to express some disappointment to you because I think that you have maybe listeners in all 50 states. I was disappointed when I went to my local U.S. House Representative's website the other day, and I didn't see a direct email address on there to get in touch with them with. And, I don't know why it is that we don't have access to Congress email addresses. It seems to me that we shouldn't have to use a form on their website, and we should just have direct access to their email addresses so that we can just go ahead and directly write them. I mean, I checked like 3 or 4 U.S. House websites, and nobody had their email address on there. It was just a form.
But if it was a form, what if the form was going to their email address?
Oh, I understand that, but there's nothing wrong with giving us their email address, and there's also nothing wrong. We don't need to be corrected if we don't want to write to our own local representative, because, I mean, if we... maybe we didn't vote for whoever our representative is, and maybe, we should be able to go around them if we don't support them being in office. I just wanted to express my disappointment.
Well, Karen,
that sounds disappointing. In my opinion, that does sound disappointing. They should put that information out publicly. They're your representative, but go for it.
They are your representatives. Oftentimes, their phone number and their email address, or at the very least, like you say, a form, is available for you to contact them or their office, especially in the capacities of their office and state. And I'll tell you this, whether they were Republican or Democrat, they were on some level receptive. I'll tell you my own experience. Eric Cantor. Nobody would ever believe that Eric Cantor is for Medicare, is for Medicaid, none of those services, none of that stuff. He's an opponent of those things when he is in Congress. However, his office was extremely helpful in a situation when I was much younger. I think I was in my 20s. I was supposed to get Medicare. I was supposed to be eligible for it. I had ran out of it or lost it, and I couldn't get access to it. His office was very gracious and stepping in order to make sure and make that work. I guess the point that I'm saying is you could still contact your congressman, whether you voted for these guys or not, and whether you voted for them or not, they still have a job to do in that office. Some may be better than others, yes, but you can still contact them, Karen. I don't think there's anything stopping you from doing so. That's my only push. I understand you wanted to be more personal. Fair enough.
I didn't need to be corrected because they also had on their website that they did not address correspondence that was from outside of their district. And, we should be able to go around our own representatives and contact somebody else.
I see what you mean. I see. So if I am here, I should be able to contact AOC in New York for some reason.
Yes, and she can either decide to assist with it or pass on it or forward it on or whatever, she does. But it's rather ridiculous that we are, as far as they are concerned, not permitted to contact them just because you're not from within the district.
It's a little bit weird, but they're not your representative. They're somebody else's representative. And I imagine that if everybody had their gates open for everybody, they'd get, constantly influxed by all these new messages. And so I can understand why they might want to close them down. But I kind of hear you, too. They are a politician. The idea that they're not responsive to the American public, in a broad sense, could be painted as concerning. But again, they're not your representative, specifically.
Just also share something else with you quickly. I don't know if this is the case within all 50 states because every state has slightly different election laws. But in Maryland, you don't have to reside within that House district in order to be a candidate for it. You can be a candidate for any U.S. House district in the state. So there aren't residency restrictions when it comes to being a U.S. House candidate in Maryland, for your information.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen.
Karen, thank you for the call.
Yeah, I understand her point. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess for me, though, it's like they have a job to do. And in the context of their job, they look at the constituents who are there as their job. And so it's like if somebody else from outside of the district is contacting them, they're like, look, man, you're not part of my, this is not part of my thing. They may think you're interesting. They may have a conversation with you about all that stuff. But at the end of the day, their bias is their constituents.
Yeah.
I don't fault them for it.
What do you think about the things she was saying? We got to close here pretty soon, but the idea that you can apply this to gubernatorial races in some states, that you should live actively and should have lived for many years in, the district where you're going to be running, that kind of thing. Makes
I'm
sense
not against that. It makes sense, yeah. I mean, how else would you know the issues of the district if you're not a part of the district, right? It's just that part. So, yeah, I don't hate that.
Combine that with constant gerrymandering, though, and I could just imagine that things get confusing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But we got to close this show out, folks. Good show.
Yes.
Slow at a couple of points, but good conversations nonetheless. I want to thank all of our guests, callers. I want to thank our engineer, Andre, and our producer.